Chapter 11 of The Gambler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Gambler, by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by C.J. Hogarth. Chapter 11. The chair, with the old lady beaming in it, was wheeled away towards the doors at the further end of the salon, while our party hastened to crowd around her, and to offer her their congratulations. In fact, eccentric as was her conduct, it was also overshadowed by her triumph, with the result that the General no longer feared to be publicly compromised by being seen with such a strange woman; but, smiling in a condescending, cheerfully familiar way, as though he were soothing a child, he offered his greetings to the old lady. At the same time, both he and the rest of the spectators were visibly impressed. Everywhere people kept pointing to the Grandmother, and talking about her. Many people even walked beside her chair in order to view her the better, while, at a little distance, Astley was carrying on a conversation on the subject with two English acquaintances of his. De Griers was simply overflowing with smiles and compliments, and a number of fine ladies were staring at the Grandmother as though she had been something curious. "Quelle victoire!" exclaimed De Griers. "Mais, madame, c'était deux feux," added Mademoiselle Blanche with an elusive smile. "Yes, I have won 12,000 florins," replied the old lady, "and then there is all this gold. With it the total ought to come to nearly 13,000. How much is that in Russian money? 6,000 roubles, I think? However, I calculated that the sum would exceed 7,000 roubles, or, at the present rate of exchange, even 8,000. 8,000 roubles! What a splendid thing! And to think of you simpletons sitting there and doing nothing! Potapitch, Martha, see what I have won!" "How did you do it, madame?" Martha exclaimed ecstatically. 8,000 roubles! And I am going to give you 50 gulden apiece. There they are." Potapitch and Martha rushed towards her to kiss her hand. "And to each bearer also I will give a 10 gulden piece. Let them have it out of the gold, Alexis Ivanovitch. But why is this footman bowing to me, and that other man as well? Are they congratulating me? Well, let them have 10 gulden apiece." "Madame la Princesse, un pauvre espatrie, malheur continuel. Les princes russes sont si généreux," said a man who for some time past had been hanging around the old lady's chair, a personage who, dressed in a shabby frock-coat and coloured waistcoat, kept taking off his cap, and smiling pathetically. "Give him 10 gulden," said the Grandmother. "No, give him 20. Now, enough of that, or I shall never get done with you all. Take a moment's rest, and then carry me away. Prascovia, I mean to buy a new dress for you tomorrow." "Yes, and for you too, Mademoiselle Blanche. Please translate, Prascovia." "Merci, madame," replied Mademoiselle Blanche gratefully, as she twisted her face into the mocking smile which usually she kept only for the benefit of De Griers and the General. The latter looked confused, and seemed greatly relieved when we reached the avenue. "How surprised Theodosia will be!" went on Grandmother, thinking of the General's nursemaid. "She, like yourselves, shall have the price of a new gown. Here, Alexis Ivanovitch, give that beggar something." A crooked-backed ragamuffin had approached to stare at us. "But perhaps he is not a beggar, only a rascal," I replied. "Never mind, never mind, give him a gulden." I approached the beggar in question, and handed him the coin. Looking at me in great astonishment, he silently accepted the gulden, while from his person there proceeded a strong smell of liquor. "Have you never tried your luck, Alexis Ivanovitch?" "No, madame. Yet just now I could see that you were burning to do so?" "I do mean to try my luck presently." "Then stake everything upon 0. You have seen how it ought to be done? How much capital do you possess?" 200 gulden, madam. Not very much. See here, I will lend you 500 if you wish. Take this purse of mine." With that she added sharply to the General, "But you need not expect to receive any." This seemed to upset him, but he said nothing, and De Griers contented himself by scowling. "Que diable!" he whispered to the General. "C'est une terrible vieille." "Look, another beggar, another beggar!" exclaimed the Grandmother. "Alexis Ivanovitch, go and give him a gulden." As she spoke, I saw approaching us a grey-headed old man with a wooden leg, a man who was dressed in a blue frock-coat and carrying a staff. He looked like an old soldier. As soon as I tendered him the coin, he fell back a step or two, and eyed me threateningly. "Was ist der Teufel?" he cried, and appended thereto a round dozen of oaths. "The man is a perfect fool!" exclaimed the Grandmother, waving her hand. "Move on now, for I am simply famished. When we have lunched, we will return to that place." "What?" cried I. "You are going to play again?" "What else do you suppose?" she retorted. "Are you going only to sit here and grow sour and let me look at you?" "Madame," said De Griers confidentially, "les chances peuvent tourner. Une seule mauvaise chance, et vous perdrez tout, surtout avec votre jeu. C'était terrible." "Oui, vous perdrez absolument," put in Mademoiselle Blanche. "What has that got to do with you?" retorted the old lady. "It is not your money that I am going to lose, it is my own. And where is that Mr. Astley of yours?" she added to myself. "He stayed behind in the casino. What a pity! He is such a nice sort of man." Arriving home, and meeting the landlord on the staircase, the Grandmother called him to her side, and boasted to him of her winnings, thereafter doing the same to Theodosia, and conferring upon her 30 gulden, after which she bid her serve luncheon. The meal over, Theodosia and Martha broke into a joint flood of ecstasy. "I was watching you all the time, Madame," quavered Martha, "and I asked Potapitch what mistress was trying to do. And my word, the heaps and heaps of money that were lying upon the table! Never in my life have I seen so much money, and there were gentlefolk around it, and other gentlefolk sitting down. So I asked Potapitch where all these gentry had come from, for, thought I, maybe the Holy Mother of God will help our mistress among them. Yes, I prayed for you, madam, and my heart died within me, so that I kept trembling and trembling. The Lord be with her, I thought to myself, and in answer to my prayer he has now sent you what he has done. Even yet I tremble to think of it all." "Alexis Ivanovitch," said the old lady, "after luncheon, that is to say about 4 o'clock, get ready to go out with me again. But in the meanwhile, good-bye. Do not forget to call a doctor, for I must take the waters. Now go and get rested a little." I left the Grandmother's presence in a state of bewilderment. Vainly I endeavoured to imagine what would become of our party, or what turn the affair would next take. I could perceive that none of the party had yet recovered their presence of mind, least of all the General. The factor of the Grandmother's appearance in place of the hourly expected telegram to announce her death, with, of course, resultant legacies, had so upset the whole scheme of intentions and projects that it was with a decided feeling of apprehension and growing paralysis that the conspirators viewed any future performances of the old lady at roulette. Yet this second factor was not quite so important as the first, since, though the Grandmother had twice declared that she did not intend to give the General any money, that declaration was not a complete ground for the abandonment of hope. Certainly De Griers, who with the General was up to the neck in the affair, had not wholly lost courage, and I felt sure that Mademoiselle Blanche also, Mademoiselle Blanche, who was not only as deeply involved as the other two, but also expectant of becoming Madame General and an important legatee, would not lightly surrender the position, but would use her every resource of coquetry upon the old lady, in order to afford a contrast to the impetuous Polina, who was difficult to understand, and lacked the art of pleasing. Yet now, when the Grandmother had just performed an astonishing feat at roulette, now, when the old lady's personality had been so clearly and typically revealed as that of a rugged, arrogant woman who was tombée en enfance, now, when everything appeared to be lost, why, now the Grandmother was as merry as a child which plays with thistledown. Good Lord, I thought with, may God forgive me, a most malicious smile, every 10 gulden piece which the Grandmother staked must have raised a blister on the General's heart, and maddened De Griers, and driven Mademoiselle de Cominges almost to frenzy with the sight of this spoon dangling before her lips. Another factor is the circumstance that even when overjoyed at winning, the Grandmother was distributing alms right and left, and taking every one to be a beggar. she again snapped out to the General that he was not going to be allowed any of her money, which meant that the old lady had quite made up her mind on the point, and was sure of it. Yes, danger loomed ahead. All these thoughts passed through my mind during the few moments that, having left the old lady's rooms, I was ascending to my own room on the top story. What most struck me was the fact that, though I had divined the chief, the stoutest threads which united the various actors in the drama, I had until now been ignorant of the methods and secrets of the game. For Polina had never been completely open with me. Although on occasions it had happened that involuntarily, as it were, she had revealed to me something of her heart, I had noticed that in most cases, in fact nearly always, she had either laughed away these revelations, or grown confused, or purposely imparted to them a false guise. Yes, she must have concealed a great deal from me. But I had a presentiment that now the end of this strained and mysterious situation was approaching. Another stroke, and all would be finished and exposed. Of my own fortunes, interested though I was in the affair, I took no account. I was in the strange position of possessing but 200 gülden, of being at a loose end, of lacking both a post, the means of subsistence, a shred of hope, and any plans for the future, yet of caring nothing for these things. Had not my mind been so full of Polina, I should have given myself up to the comical piquancy of the impending denouement, and laughed my fill at it. But the thought of Polina was torture to me. That her fate was settled I already had an inkling, yet that was not the thought which was giving me so much uneasiness. What I really wished for was to penetrate her secrets. I wanted her to come to me and say, "I love you," and if she would not so come, or if to hope that she would ever do so was an unthinkable absurdity, why, then there was nothing else for me to want. Even now I do not know what I am wanting. I feel like a man who has lost his way. I yearn but to be in her presence, and within the circle of her light and splendor, to be there now and forever, and for the whole of my life. More I do not know. How can I ever bring myself to leave her? On reaching the third story of the hotel I experienced a shock. I was just passing the General's suite when something caused me to look round. Out of a door about 20 paces away there was coming Polina. She hesitated for a moment on seeing me, and then beckoned me to her. "Polina Alexandrovna!" "Hush! Not so loud!" "Something startled me just now," I whispered, "and I looked round and saw you. Some electrical influence seems to emanate from your form." "Take this letter," she went on with a frown. Probably she had not even heard my words, she was so preoccupied, "and hand it personally to Mr. Astley. Go as quickly as ever you can, please. No answer will be required. He himself—" She did not finish her sentence. "To Mr. Astley?" I asked in some astonishment. But she had vanished again. Aha! So the two were carrying on a correspondence. However, I set off to search for Astley, first at his hotel and then at the Casino, where I went the round of the salons in vain. At length, vexed and almost in despair, I was on my way home when I ran across him among a troop of English ladies and gentlemen who had been out for a ride. Beckoning to him to stop, I handed him the letter. We had barely time even to look at one another, but I suspected that it was of set purpose that he restarted his horse so quickly. Was jealousy then gnawing at me? At all events, I felt exceedingly depressed, despite the fact that I had no desire to ascertain what the correspondence was about. To think that he should be her confidant! My friend, mine own familiar friend, passed through my mind. Yet, was there any love in the matter? Of course not, reason whispered to me. But reason goes for little on such occasions. I felt that the matter must be cleared up, for it was becoming unpleasantly complex. I had scarcely set foot in the hotel when the commissionaire and the landlord, the latter issuing from his room for the purpose, alike informed me that I was being searched for high and low, that 3 separate messages to ascertain my whereabouts had come down from the General. When I entered his study I was feeling anything but kindly disposed. I found there the General himself, De Griers, and Mlle. Blanche, but not Mademoiselle's mother. who was a person whom her reputed daughter used only for show purposes, since in all matters of business the daughter fended for herself, and it is unlikely that the mother knew anything about them. Some very heated discussion was in progress, and meanwhile the door of the study was open, an unprecedented circumstance. As I approached the portals I could hear loud voices raised, for mingled with the pert, venomous accents of De Griers were Mlle. Blanche's excited, impudently abusive tongue, and the General's plaintive wail, as apparently he sought to justify himself in something. But on my appearance every one stopped speaking, and tried to put a better face upon matters. De Griers smoothed his hair and twisted his angry face into a smile, into the mean, studiedly polite French smile which I so detested, while the downcast, perplexed General assumed an air of dignity, though only in a mechanical way. On the other hand, Mlle. Blanche did not trouble to conceal the wrath that was sparkling in her countenance, but bent her gaze upon me with an air of impatient expectancy. I may remark that hitherto she had treated me with absolute superciliousness, and so far from answering my salutations, had always ignored them. "Alexis Ivanovitch," began the General, in a tone of affectionate upbraiding, "may I say to you that I find it strange, exceedingly strange, that—in short, your conduct towards myself and my family—in a word, extremely—" "Ce n'est pas ça," interrupted De Griers in a tone of impatience and contempt. Evidently he was the ruling spirit of the conclave. "Mon cher monsieur, notre général se trompe. What he means to say is that he warns you, he begs of you most earnestly not to ruin him. I use the expression because—" "Why? Why?" I interjected. "Because you have taken upon yourself to act as guide to this—how shall I express it?—to this old lady, à cette pauvre, terrible vieille. But she will only gamble away all that she has, gamble it away like thistledown. You yourself have seen her play. Once she has acquired the taste for gambling, she will never leave the roulette table, but, of sheer perversity and temper, will stake her all, and lose it. In cases such as hers a gambler can never be torn away from the game. And then, asseverated the General, you will have ruined my whole family. I and my family are her heirs, for she has no nearer relatives than ourselves. I tell you frankly that my affairs are in very great disorder. How much they are so you yourself are partially aware. If she should lose a large sum, or maybe her whole fortune, what will become of us? Of my children," here the General exchanged a glance with De Griers, "or of me?" Here he looked at Mlle. Blanche, who turned her head contemptuously away. "Alexis Ivanovitch, I beg of you to save us." "Tell me, General, how am I to do so? On what footing do I stand here?" "Refuse to take her about. Simply leave her alone." "But she would soon find someone else to take my place." "Ce n'est pas ça, ce n'est pas ça," again interrupted De Griers. "Que diable! Do not leave her alone so much as advise her, persuade her, draw her away. In any case, do not let her gamble. Find her some counter-attraction." "And how am I to do that? If only you would undertake the task, Monsieur de Griers." I said this last as innocently as possible, but at once saw a rapid glance of excited interrogation pass from Mlle. Blanche to De Griers, while in the face of the latter also there gleamed something which he could not repress. "Well, at the present moment she would refuse to accept my services," said he, with a gesture. "But if, later—" Here he gave Mlle. Blanche another glance, which was full of meaning. Whereupon she advanced towards me with a bewitching smile, and seized and pressed my hands. Devil take it, but how that devilish visage of hers could change! At the present moment it was a visage full of supplication, and as gentle in its expression as that of a smiling, roguish infant. Stealthily she drew me apart from the rest, as though the more completely to separate me from them, and, though no harm came of her doing so, for it was merely a stupid manoeuvre, and no more, I found the situation very unpleasant. The General hastened to lend her his support. "Alexis Ivanovitch," he began, "pray pardon me for having said what I did just now. for having said more than I meant to do. I beg and beseech you, I kiss the hem of your garment, as our Russian saying has it, for you, and only you, can save us. I and Mademoiselle de Cominges, we all of us beg of you. But you understand, do you not? Surely you understand." And with his eyes he indicated Mademoiselle Blanche. Truly he was cutting a pitiful figure. At this moment 3 low, respectful knocks sounded at the door, which, on being opened, revealed a chambermaid, with Potapitch behind her, come from the Grandmother to request that I should attend her in her rooms. "She is in a bad humour," added Potapitch. The time was 3:30. "My mistress was unable to sleep," explained Potapitch. "So, after tossing about for a while, she suddenly rose, called for her chair, and sent me to look for you. She is now in the verandah." "Quelle mégère!" exclaimed De Griers. True enough, I found Madame in the hotel verandah, much put about at my delay, for she had been unable to contain herself until 4 o'clock. "Lift me up!" she cried to the bearers, and once more we set out for the roulette salons. End of Chapter 11. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 12 of The Gambler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Gambler, by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by C.J. Hogarth. Chapter 12. The Grandmother was in an impatient, irritable frame of mind. Without doubt the roulette had turned her head, for she appeared to be indifferent to everything else, and, in general, seemed much distraught. For instance, she asked me no questions about objects en route, except that, when a sumptuous barouche passed us and raised a cloud of dust, she lifted her hand for a moment and inquired, "What was that?" Yet even then she did not appear to hear my reply, although at times her abstraction was interrupted by sallies and fits of sharp, impatient fidgeting. Again, when I pointed out to her the Baron and Baroness Burmergelm walking to the Casino, she merely looked at them in an absent-minded sort of way, and said with complete indifference, "Ah!" Then, turning sharply to Potapitch and Martha, who were walking behind us, she rapped out, "Why have you attached yourselves to the party? We are not going to take you with us every time. Go home at once." Then, when the servants had pulled hasty bows and departed, she added to me, "You are all the escort I need." At the Casino the Grandmother seemed to be expected, for no time was lost in procuring her former place beside the croupier. It is my opinion that, though croupiers seem such ordinary humdrum officials, men who care nothing whether the bank wins or loses, they are, in reality, anything but indifferent to the bank's losing, and are given instructions to attract players, and to keep a watch over the bank's interests, as also that for such services these officials are awarded prizes and premiums. At all events, the croupiers of Roulettenberg seemed to look upon the Grandmother as their lawful prey, whereafter there befell what our party had foretold. It happened thus. As soon as ever we arrived, the Grandmother ordered me to stake 12 10-gulden pieces in succession upon 0. Once, twice, and thrice I did so, yet 0 never turned up. "Stake again," said the old lady, with an impatient nudge of my elbow, and I obeyed. "How many times have we lost?" she inquired, actually grinding her teeth in her excitement. "We have lost 144 10-gulden pieces," I replied. "I tell you, madame, that 0 may not turn up until nightfall." "Never mind," she interrupted. "Keep on staking upon 0. And also stake 1,000 gulden upon rouge. Here is a banknote with which to do so." The red turned up, but 0 missed again, and we only got our 1,000 gulden back. "But you see, whispered the old lady, "we have now recovered almost all that we staked. Try 0 again. Let us do so another 10 times, and then leave off." By the 5th round, however, the Grandmother was weary of the scheme. "To the devil with that 0!" she exclaimed. "Stake 4,000 gulden upon the red." "But, madame, that will be so much to venture," I remonstrated. "Suppose the red should not turn up?" The grandmother almost struck me in her excitement. Her agitation was rapidly making her quarrelsome. Consequently, there was nothing for it but to stake the whole 4,000 gulden as she had directed. The wheel revolved, while the grandmother sat as bolt upright, and with as proud and quiet a mien as though she had not the least doubt of winning. "Zero!" cried the croupier. At first the old lady failed to understand the situation, but as soon as she saw the croupier raking in her 4,000 gulden, together with everything else that happened to be lying on the table, and recognized that the zero which had been so long turning up, and on which we had lost nearly 200 10-gulden pieces, had at length, as though of set purpose, made a sudden reappearance, why, the poor old lady fell to cursing it, and to throwing herself about, and wailing and gesticulating at the company at large. Indeed, some people in our vicinity actually burst out laughing. "To think that that accursed zero should have turned up now!" she sobbed. "The accursed thing! And it is all your fault," she added, rounding upon me in a frenzy. "It was you who persuaded me to cease staking upon it." "But, madame, I only explained the game to you. How am I to answer for every mischance which may occur in it?" "You and your mischances!" she whispered threateningly. "Go! Away at once!" "Farewell, then, madame," and I turned to depart. "No, stay," she put in hastily. "Where are you going to? Why should you leave me, you fool? No, no, stay here. It is I who was the fool. Tell me what I ought to do." "I cannot take it upon myself to advise you, for you will only blame me if I do so. Play at your own discretion. Say exactly what you wish staked, and I will stake it." "Very well. Stake another 4,000 gulden upon the red. Take this bank-note to do it with. I have still got 20,000 roubles in actual cash." "But," I whispered, "such a quantity of money!" "Never mind. I cannot rest until I have won back my losses. Stake!" I staked, and we lost. "Stake again, stake again. 8,000 at a stroke." "I cannot, madame. The largest stake allowed is 4,000 gulden." "Well, then, stake 4,000." This time we won, and the grandmother recovered herself a little. You see," she exclaimed as she nudged me. "Stake another 4,000." I did so, and lost. Again and yet again we lost. "Madame, your 12,000 gulden are now gone," at length I reported. "I see they are," she replied with, as it were, the calmness of despair. "I see they are." She muttered again as she gazed straight in front of her like a person lost in thought. "Ah, well, I do not mean to rest until I have staked another 4,000. "But you have no money with which to do it, madame. In this satchel I can see only a few 5% bonds and some transfers, no actual cash." "And in the purse?" "A mere trifle." "But there is a money-changer's office here, is there not? They told me I should be able to get any sort of paper security changed." "Quite so, to any amount you please. But you will lose on the transaction what would frighten even a Jew." "Rubbish! I am determined to retrieve my losses. Take me away, and call those fools of bearers." I wheeled the chair out of the throng, and the bearers making their appearance, we left the casino. "Hurry, hurry!" commanded the grandmother. "Show me the nearest way to the money-changers. Is it far?" "A couple of steps, madame." At the turning from the square into the avenue we came face to face with the whole of our party: the General, De Griers, Mlle. Blanche, and her mother. Only Polina and Mr. Astley were absent. "Well, well, well!" exclaimed the grandmother. "But we have no time to stop. What do you want? I can't talk to you here." I dropped behind a little, and immediately was pounced upon by De Griers. "She has lost this morning's winnings," I whispered, "and also 12,000 gulden of her original money. At the present moment we are going to get some bonds changed." De Griers stamped his foot with vexation, and hastened to communicate the tidings to the General. Meanwhile we continued to wheel the old lady along. "Stop her! Stop her!" whispered the General in consternation. "You had better try and stop her yourself," I returned, also in a whisper. "My good mother," he said as he approached her, "my good mother, pray let—" his voice was beginning to tremble and sink. "Let us hire a carriage, and go for a drive. Near here there is an enchanting view to be obtained. We were just coming to invite you to go and see it." "Begone with you and your views," said the Grandmother angrily, as she waved him away. "And there are trees there, and we could have tea under them," continued the General, now in utter despair. "Nous boirons du lait sur l'herbe fraîche," added De Griers with the snarl almost of a wild beast. Du lait de l'herbe fraîche. The ideal of the Parisian bourgeois, his whole outlook upon la nature et la vérité. "Have done with you and your milk," cried the old lady. "Go and stuff yourself as much as you like, but my stomach simply recoils from the idea. What are you stopping for? I have nothing to say to you." "Here we are, madame," I announced. "Here is the money-changer's office." I entered to get the securities changed, while the Grandmother remained outside in the porch, and the rest waited at a little distance, in doubt as to their best course of action. At length the old lady turned such an angry stare upon them that they departed along the road towards the Casino. The process of changing involved complicated calculations, which soon necessitated my return to the Grandmother for instructions. "The thieves!" she exclaimed as she clapped her hands together. "Never mind, though. Get the documents cashed. No, send the banker out to me," she added as an afterthought. "Would one of the clerks do, madame?" "Yes, one of the clerks. The thieves!" The clerk consented to come out when he perceived that he was being asked for by an old lady who was too infirm to walk. After which the Grandmother began to upbraid him at length, and with great vehemence, for his alleged usuriousness, and to bargain with him in a mixture of Russian, French, and German, I acting as interpreter. Meanwhile, the grave-faced official eyed us both, and silently nodded his head. At the Grandmother, in particular, he gazed with a curiosity which almost bordered upon rudeness. At length, too, he smiled. "Pray recollect yourself," cried the old lady, "and may my money choke you! Alexis Ivanovitch, tell him that we can easily repair to someone else. The clerk says that others will give you even less than he." Of what the ultimate calculations consisted I do not exactly remember, but at all events they were alarming. Receiving 12,000 florins in gold, I took also the statement of accounts and carried it out to the Grandmother. "Well, well," she said, "I am no accountant. Let us hurry away, and she waved the paper aside. "Neither upon that accursed zero, however, nor upon that equally accursed red, do I mean to stake a cent," I muttered to myself as I entered the Casino. This time I did all I could to persuade the old lady to stake as little as possible, saying that a turn would come in the chances when she would be at liberty to stake more. But she was so impatient that, though at first she agreed to do as I suggested, nothing could stop her when once she had begun. By way of prelude, she won stakes of 100 and 200 gulden. "There you are," she said as she nudged me. "See what we have won. Surely it would be worth our while to stake 4,000 instead of 100, for we might win another 4,000, and then— Oh, it was your fault before, all your fault." I felt greatly put out as I watched her play, but I decided to hold my tongue and to give her no more advice. Suddenly De Griers appeared on the scene. It seemed that all this while he and his companions had been standing beside us, though I noticed that Mlle. Blanche had withdrawn a little from the rest, and was engaged in flirting with the Prince. Clearly the General was greatly put out at this. Indeed, he was in a perfect agony of vexation. But Mademoiselle was careful never to look his way, though he did his best to attract her notice. Poor General! By turns his face blanched and reddened, and he was trembling to such an extent that he could scarcely follow the old lady's play. At length Mademoiselle and the Prince took their departure, and the General followed them. "Madame, madame," sounded the honeyed accents of De Griers as he leant over to whisper in the Grandmother's ear. "That stake will never win. No, no, it is impossible," he added in Russian with a writhe. "No, no." "But why not?" asked the Grandmother, turning round. "Show me what I ought to do." Instantly De Griers burst into a babble of French as he advised, jumped about, declared that such and such chances ought to be waited for, and started to make calculations of figures. All this he addressed to me in my capacity as translator, tapping the table the while with his finger and pointing hither and thither. At length he seized a pencil and began to reckon sums on paper until he had exhausted the Grandmother's patience. "Away with you!" she interrupted. "You talk sheer nonsense, for, though you keep on saying 'Madame, Madame,' you haven't the least notion what ought to be done. Away with you, I say." "Mais, Madame," cooed De Griers, and straightway started afresh with his fussy instructions. "Stake just once as he advises," the Grandmother said to me, "and then we shall see what we shall see. Of course his stake might win." As a matter of fact, De Griers' one object was to distract the old lady from staking large sums. Wherefore he now suggested to her that she should stake upon certain numbers, singly and in groups. Consequently, in accordance with his instructions, I staked a 10-gulden piece upon several odd numbers in the first 20, and 5 10-gulden pieces upon certain groups of numbers, groups of from 12 to 18, and from 18 to 24. The total staked amounted to 160 gulden. The wheel revolved. "Zero!" cried the croupier. We had lost it all. "The fool!" cried the old lady as she turned upon De Griers. "You infernal Frenchman, to think that you should advise! Away with you! Though you fuss and fuss, you don't even know what you're talking about." Deeply offended, De Griers shrugged his shoulders, favored the Grandmother with a look of contempt, and departed. For some time past he had been feeling ashamed of being seen in such company, and this had proved the last straw. An hour later we had lost everything in hand. "Home!" cried the Grandmother. Not until we had turned into the avenue did she utter a word, but from that point onwards, until we arrived at the hotel, she kept venting exclamations of, "What a fool I am! What a silly old fool I am, to be sure!" Arrived at the hotel, she called for tea, and then gave orders for her luggage to be packed. "We are off again," she announced. "But whither, Madame?" inquired Martha. "What business is that of yours? Let the cricket stick to its hearth," the Russian form of mind your own business. "Potapitch, have everything packed, for we are returning to Moscow at once. I have fooled away 15,000 roubles." 15,000 roubles, good mistress! My God! And Potapitch spat upon his hands, probably to show that he was ready to serve her in any way he could. "Now then, you fool, at once you begin with your weeping and wailing. Be quiet, and pack. Also, run downstairs and get my hotel bill." "The next train leaves at 9:30, Madame," I interposed with a view to checking her agitation. "And what is the time now?" "8:30. How vexing! But never mind. Alexis Ivanovitch, I have not a kopeck left. I have but these 2 banknotes. Please run to the office and get them changed. Otherwise I shall have nothing to travel with." Departing on her errand, I returned half an hour later to find the whole party gathered in her rooms. It appeared that the news of her impending departure for Moscow had thrown the conspirators into consternation even greater than her losses had done. "For," said they, "even if her departure should save her fortune, what will become of the General later? And who is to repay De Griers? Clearly Mademoiselle Blanche would never consent to wait until the Grandmother was dead, but would at once elope with the Prince or some one else." So they had all gathered together, endeavouring to calm and dissuade the Grandmother. Only Polina was absent. For her part, the Grandmother had nothing for the party but abuse. "Away with you, you rascals!" she was shouting. "What have my affairs to do with you? Why, in particular, do you," here she indicated De Griers, "come sneaking here with your goat's beard? And what do you," here she turned to Mademoiselle Blanche, "want of me? What are you finicking for?" "Diantre!" muttered Mademoiselle under her breath, but her eyes were flashing. Then all at once she burst into a laugh and left the room, crying to the General as she did so, "Elle vivra sans un." "So you have been counting upon my death, have you?" fumed the old lady. "Away with you! Clear them out of the room, Alexis Ivanovitch. What business is it of theirs? It is not their money that I have been squandering, but my own. The General shrugged his shoulders, bowed, and withdrew, with De Griers behind him. "Call Prascovia," commanded the Grandmother, and in 5 minutes Martha reappeared with Polina, who had been sitting with the children in her own room, having purposely determined not to leave it that day. Her face looked grave and careworn. "Prascovia," began the Grandmother, "is what I have just heard through a side wind true? Namely, that this fool of a stepfather of yours is going to marry that silly whirligig of a Frenchwoman, that actress, or something worse? Tell me, is it true?" "I do not know for certain, Grandmamma," replied Polina, "but from Mademoiselle Blanche's account, for she does not appear to think it necessary to conceal anything, I conclude that—" "You need not say any more," interrupted the Grandmother energetically. "I understand the situation. I always thought we should get something like this from him, for I always looked upon him as a futile, frivolous fellow, who gave himself unconscionable airs on the fact of his being a general, though he only became one because he retired as a colonel. Yes, I know all about the sending of the telegrams to inquire whether the old woman's likely to turn up her toes soon. Ah, they were looking for the legacies. Without money that wretched woman, what is her name, Eau de Cominges, would never dream of accepting the General and his false teeth. No, not even for him to be her lackey, since she herself, they say, possesses a pile of money, and lends it on interest, and makes a good thing out of it. However, it is not you, Prascovia, that I am blaming. It was not you who sent those telegrams, nor for that matter do I wish to recall old scores. True, I know that you are a vixen by nature, that you are a wasp which will sting one if one touches it. Yet my heart is sore for you, for I loved your mother, Katerina. Now, will you leave everything here and come away with me? Otherwise I do not know what is to become of you, and it is not right that you should continue living with these people." "Nay," she interposed the moment that Polina attempted to speak, "I have not yet finished. I ask of you nothing in return. My house in Moscow is, as you know, large enough for a palace, and you could occupy a whole floor of it if you liked, and keep away from me for weeks together. Will you come with me, or will you not?" "First of all, let me ask of you," replied Polina, "whether you are intending to depart at once." "What? You suppose me to be jesting? I have said that I am going, and I am going. Today I have squandered 15,000 roubles at that accursed roulette of yours, and though 5 years ago I promised the people of a certain suburb of Moscow to build them a stone church in place of a wooden one, I have been fooling away my money here. However, I am going back now to build my church." "But what about the waters, Grandmamma? Surely you came here to take the waters?" "You and your waters! Do not anger me, Prascovia. Surely you are trying to— Say, then, will you, or will you not, come with me?" "Grandmamma," Polina replied with deep feeling, "I am very, very grateful to you for the shelter which you have so kindly offered me. Also, to a certain extent, you have guessed my position aright, and I am beholden to you to such an extent that it may be that I will come and live with you, and that very soon. Yet there are important reasons why I cannot make up my mind just yet. If you would let me have, say, a couple of weeks to decide in—" "You mean that you are not coming?" "I mean only that I cannot come just yet. At all events, I could not well leave my little brother and sister here, since, if I were to leave them, they would be abandoned altogether. But if, Grandmamma, you would take the little ones and myself, then, of course, I could come with you, and would do all I could to serve you." This she said with great earnestness. "Only, without the little ones, I cannot come." "Do not make a fuss." As a matter of fact, Polina never at any time either fussed or wept. "The great foster-father," translated literally, the great poulterer, "can find for all his chicks a place. You are not coming without the children? But see here, Prascovia, I wish you well, and nothing but well. Yet I have divined the reason why you will not come. Yes, I know all, Prascovia. That Frenchman will never bring you good of any sort." Polina coloured hotly, and even I started. For, thought I to myself, every one seems to know about that affair, or perhaps I am the only one who does not know about it. "Now, do not frown," continued the Grandmother. But I do not intend to slur things over. You will take care that no harm befalls you, will you not? For you are a girl of sense, and I am sorry for you. I regard you in a different light to the rest of them. And now, please, leave me. Good-bye." "But let me stay with you a little longer," said Polina. "No," replied the other, "you need not. Do not bother me, for you and all of them have tired me out." Yet when Polina tried to kiss the grandmother's hand, the old lady withdrew it, and herself kissed the girl on the cheek. As she passed me, Polina gave me a momentary glance, and then as swiftly averted her eyes. "And good-bye to you also, Alexis Ivanovitch. The train starts in an hour's time, and I think that you must be weary of me. Take these 500 gulden for yourself." "I thank you humbly, madame, but I am ashamed to—" "Come, come," cried the grandmother so energetically, and with such an air of menace, that I did not dare refuse the money further. "If, when in Moscow, you have no place where you can lay your head," she added, "come and see me, and I will give you a recommendation. Now, Potapitch, get things ready." I ascended to my room, and lay down upon the bed. A whole hour I must have lain thus, with my head resting upon my hand. So the crisis had come. I needed time for its consideration. Tomorrow I would have a talk with Polina. Ah, the Frenchman! So it was true. But how could it be so? Polina and De Griers? What a combination! No, it was too improbable. Suddenly I leapt up with the idea of seeking Astley and forcing him to speak. There could be no doubt that he knew more than I did. Astley? Well, he was another problem for me to solve. Suddenly there came a knock at the door, and I opened it to find Potapitch awaiting me. "Sir," he said, "my mistress is asking for you." "Indeed? But she is just departing, is she not? The train leaves in 10 minutes' time." "She is uneasy, sir. She cannot rest. Come quickly, sir. Do not delay." I ran downstairs at once. The grandmother was just being carried out of her rooms into the corridor. In her hands she held a roll of bank-notes. "Alexis Ivanovitch," she cried, "walk on ahead, and we will set out again." "But whither, madame?" "I cannot rest until I have retrieved my losses. March on ahead, and ask me no questions. Play continues until midnight, does it not?" For a moment I stood stupefied, stood deep in thought. But it was not long before I had made up my mind. "With your leave, madame," I said, "I will not go with you." "And why not? What do you mean? Is every one here a stupid good-for-nothing?" "Pardon me, but I have nothing to reproach myself with. I merely will not go. I merely intend neither to witness nor to join in your play. I also beg to return you your 500 gulden. Farewell." Laying the money upon a little table which the grandmother's chair happened to be passing, I bowed and withdrew. "What folly!" the grandmother shouted after me. "Very well, then, do not come, and I will find my way alone. Potapitch, you must come with me. Lift up the chair, and carry me along." I failed to find Mr. Astley, and returned home. It was now growing late. It was past midnight, but I subsequently learnt from Potapitch how the grandmother's day had ended. She had lost all the money which earlier in the day I had got for her paper securities, a sum amounting to about 10,000 roubles. This she did under the direction of the Pole whom that afternoon she had dowered with 2 10-gulden pieces. But before his arrival on the scene she had commanded Potapitch to stake for her, until at length she had told him also to go about his business. Upon that the Pole had leapt into the breach. Not only did it happen that he knew the Russian language, but also he could speak a mixture of 3 different dialects, so that the pair were able to understand one another. Yet the old lady never ceased to abuse him, despite his deferential manner, and to compare him unfavourably with myself. So, at all events, Potapitch declared. "You," the old chamberlain said to me, "treated her as a gentleman should. But he robbed her right and left, as I could see with my own eyes. Twice she caught him at it, and rated him soundly. On one occasion she even pulled his hair, so that the bystanders burst out laughing. Yet she lost everything, sir. That is to say, she lost all that you had changed for her. Then we brought her home, and after asking for some water and saying her prayers, she went to bed. So worn out was she that she fell asleep at once. May God send her dreams of angels. And this is all that foreign travel has done for us. Oh, my own Moscow! For what have we not at home there, in Moscow? Such a garden, and flowers as you could never see here, and fresh air, and apple trees coming into blossom, and a beautiful view to look upon. Ah, but what must she do but go travelling abroad? Alack, alack! End of chapter 12. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 13 of The Gambler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Gambler by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by C.J. Hogarth. Chapter 13. Almost a month has passed since I last touched these notes which I began under the influence of impressions at once poignant and disordered. The crisis which I then felt to be approaching has now arrived, but in a form 100 times more extensive and unexpected than I had looked for. To me it all seems strange, uncouth, and tragic. Certain occurrences have befallen me which border upon the marvelous. At all events, that is how I view them. I view them so in one regard at least. I refer to the whirlpool of events in which, at the time, I was revolving. But the most curious feature of all is my relation to those events, for hitherto I had never clearly understood myself. Yet now the actual crisis has passed away like a dream. Even my passion for Polina is dead. Was it ever so strong and genuine as I thought? If so, what has become of it now? At times I fancy that I must be mad, that somewhere I am sitting in a madhouse, that these events have merely seemed to happen, that still they merely seem to be happening. I have been arranging and re-perusing my notes, perhaps for the purpose of convincing myself that I am not in a madhouse. At present I am lonely and alone. Autumn is coming. Already it is mellowing the leaves, and, as I sit brooding in this melancholy little town, and how melancholy the little towns of Germany can be, I find myself taking no thought for the future, but living under the influence of passing moods, and of my recollections of the tempest which recently drew me into its vortex, and then cast me out again. At times I seem still to be caught within that vortex. At times the tempest seems once more to be gathering, and, as it passes overhead, to be wrapping me in its folds, until I have lost my sense of order and reality, and continue whirling and whirling and whirling around. Yet it may be that I shall be able to stop myself from revolving if once I can succeed in rendering myself an exact account of what has happened within the month just past. Somehow I feel drawn towards the pen. On many and many an evening I have had nothing else in the world to do. But curiously enough, of late I have taken to amusing myself with the works of Monsieur Paul de Kock, which I read in German translations obtained from a wretched local library. These works I cannot abide, yet I read them, and find myself marvelling that I should be doing so. Somehow I seem to be afraid of any serious book, afraid of permitting any serious preoccupation to break the spell of the passing moment. So dear to me is the formless dream of which I have spoken, so dear to me are the impressions which it has left behind it, that I fear to touch the vision with anything new, lest it should dissolve in smoke. But is it so dear to me? Yes, it is dear to me, and will ever be fresh in my recollections, even 40 years hence. So let me write of it, but only partially, and in a more abridged form than my full impressions might warrant. First of all, let me conclude the history of the grandmother. Next day she lost every gulden that she possessed. Things were bound to happen so, for persons of her type who have once entered upon that road descend it with ever-increasing rapidity, even as a sledge descends a toboggan slide. All day until 8 o'clock that evening did she play, and, though I personally did not witness her exploits, I learnt of them later through report. All that day Potapitch remained in attendance upon her, but the Poles who directed her play she changed more than once, As a beginning, she dismissed her Pole of the previous day, the Pole whose hair she had pulled, and took to herself another one; but the latter proved worse even than the former, and incurred dismissal in favor of the first Pole, who, during the time of his unemployment, had nevertheless hovered around the Grandmother's chair, and from time to time obtruded his head over her shoulder. At length the old lady became desperate, for the second Pole, when dismissed, imitated his predecessor by declining to go away, with the result that one Pole remained standing on the right of the victim, and the other on her left, from which vantage points the pair quarrelled, abused each other concerning the stakes and rounds, and exchanged the epithet "Ladek" (rascal), and other Polish terms of endearment. Finally, they effected a mutual reconciliation, and, tossing the money about anyhow, played simply at random. Once more quarrelling, each of them staked money on his own side of the Grandmother's chair. For instance, the one Pole staked upon the red, and the other one upon the black, until they had so confused and browbeaten the old lady that, nearly weeping, she was forced to appeal to the head croupier for protection, and to have the two Poles expelled. No time was lost in this being done, despite the rascals' cries and protestations that the old lady was in their debt, that she had cheated them, and that her general behaviour had been mean and dishonourable. The same evening the unfortunate Potapitch related the story to me with tears, complaining that the two men had filled their pockets with money (he himself had seen them do it), which had been shamelessly pilfered from his mistress. For instance, one Pole demanded of the Grandmother 50 gulden for his trouble, and then staked the money by the side of her stake. She happened to win, whereupon he cried out that the winning stake was his, and hers the loser. As soon as the two Poles had been expelled, Potapitch left the room and reported to the authorities that the men's pockets were full of gold, and, on the Grandmother also requesting the head croupier to look into the affair, the police made their appearance, and despite the protests of the Poles, who indeed had been caught red-handed, their pockets were turned inside out, and the contents handed over to the Grandmother. In fact, in view of the circumstance that she lost all day, the croupiers and other authorities of the Casino showed her every attention, and on her fame spreading through the town, visitors of every nationality, even the most knowing of them, the most distinguished, crowded to get a glimpse of la vieille Comtesse Russe, tombée en enfance, who had lost so many millions. Yet with the money which the authorities restored to her from the pockets of the Poles, the Grandmother effected very, very little, for there soon arrived to take his countryman's place a third Pole, a man who could speak Russian fluently, was dressed like a gentleman, albeit in lackeyish fashion, and sported a huge moustache. Though polite enough to the old lady, he took a high hand with the bystanders. In short, he offered himself less as a servant than as an entertainer. After each round he would turn to the old lady and swear terrible oaths to the effect that he was a Polish gentleman of honour, who would scorn to take a kopeck of her money; and, though he repeated these oaths so often that at length she grew alarmed, he had her play in hand, and began to win on her behalf, wherefore she felt that she could not well get rid of him. An hour later the two Poles, who earlier in the day had been expelled from the Casino, made a reappearance behind the old lady's chair, and renewed their offers of service, even if it were only to be sent on messages. But from Potapitch I subsequently had it that between these rascals and the said gentleman of honour there passed a wink, as well as that the latter put something into their hands. Next, since the Grandmother had not yet lunched, she had scarcely for a moment left her chair, one of the two Poles ran to the restaurant of the Casino, and brought her thence a cup of soup, and afterwards some tea. In fact, both the Poles hastened to perform this office. Finally, towards the close of the day, when it was clear that the Grandmother was about to play her last bank-note, there could be seen standing behind her chair no fewer than 6 natives of Poland, persons who, as yet, had been neither audible nor visible; and as soon as ever the old lady played the note in question, they took no further notice of her, but pushed their way past her chair to the table, seized the money, and staked it, shouting and disputing the while, and arguing with the gentleman of honour, who also had forgotten the grandmother's existence, as though he were their equal. Even when the grandmother had lost her all, and was returning, about 8 o'clock, to the hotel, some 3 or 4 Poles could not bring themselves to leave her, but went on running beside her chair and volubly protesting that the grandmother had cheated them, and that she ought to be made to surrender what was not her own. Thus the party arrived at the hotel, whence presently the gang of rascals was ejected neck and crop. According to Potapitch's calculations, the grandmother lost, that day, a total of 90,000 roubles, in addition to the money which she had lost the day before. Every paper security which she had brought with her, 5% bonds, internal loan scrip, and what not, she had changed into cash. Also, I could not but marvel at the way in which, for 7 or 8 hours at a stretch, she sat in that chair of hers, almost never leaving the table. Again, Potapitch told me that there were 3 occasions on which she really began to win, but that, led on by false hopes, she was unable to tear herself away at the right moment. Every gambler knows how a person may sit a day and a night at cards without ever casting a glance to right or to left. Meanwhile, that day some other very important events were passing in our hotel. As early as 11 o'clock, that is to say, before the grandmother had quitted her rooms, the General and De Griers decided upon their last stroke. In other words, on learning that the old lady had changed her mind about departing, and was bent on setting out for the Casino again, the whole of our gang, Polina only excepted, proceeded en masse to her rooms, for the purpose of finally and frankly treating with her. But the General, quaking and greatly apprehensive as to his possible future, overdid things. After half an hour's prayers and entreaties, coupled with a full confession of his debts and even of his passion for Mademoiselle Blanche, yes, he had quite lost his head, he suddenly adopted a tone of menace, and started to rage at the old lady, exclaiming that she was sullying the family honor, that she was making a public scandal of herself, and that she was smirching the fair name of Russia. The upshot was that the grandmother turned him out of the room with her stick. It was a real stick, too. Later in the morning he held several consultations with De Griers, the question which occupied him being, "Is it any way possible to make use of the police? To tell them that this respected but unfortunate old lady has gone out of her mind, and is squandering her last kopeck, or something of the kind? In short, is it in any way possible to engineer a species of supervision over, or of restraint upon, the old lady?" De Griers, however, shrugged his shoulders at this, and laughed in the General's face, while the old warrior went on chattering volubly, and running up and down his study. Finally De Griers waved his hand, and disappeared from view, and by evening it became known that he had left the hotel, after holding a very secret and important conference with Mademoiselle Blanche. As for the latter, from early morning she had taken decisive measures, by completely excluding the General from her presence, and bestowing upon him not a glance. Indeed, even when the General pursued her to the Casino, and met her walking arm in arm with the Prince, he, the General, received from her and her mother not the slightest recognition. Nor did the Prince himself bow. The rest of the day Mademoiselle spent in probing the Prince, and trying to make him declare himself. But in this she made a woeful mistake. The little incident occurred in the evening. Suddenly Mademoiselle Blanche realized that the Prince had not even a copper to his name, but, on the contrary, was minded to borrow of her money wherewith to play at roulette. In high displeasure she drove him from her presence, and shut herself up in her room. The same morning I went to see, or rather to look for, Mr. Astley, but was unsuccessful in my quest. Neither in his rooms, nor in the Casino, nor in the park was he to be found. Nor did he that day lunch at his hotel as usual. However, at about 5 o'clock I caught sight of him walking from the railway station to the Hôtel d'Angleterre. He seemed to be in a great hurry and much preoccupied, though in his face I could discern no actual traces of worry or perturbation. He held out to me a friendly hand with his usual ejaculation of "Ah!" but did not check his stride. I turned and walked beside him, but found, somehow, that his answers forbade any putting of definite questions. Moreover, I felt reluctant to speak to him of Polina, nor, for his part, did he ask me any questions concerning her, although on my telling him of the Grandmother's exploits, he listened attentively and gravely, and then shrugged his shoulders. "She is gambling away everything that she has," I remarked. "Indeed! She arrived at the Casino even before I had taken my departure by train, so I knew she had been playing. If I should have time I will go to the Casino tonight and take a look at her. The thing interests me." "Where have you been today?" I asked, surprised at myself for having as yet omitted to put to him that question. "To Frankfurt." "On business?" "On business." What more was there to be asked after that? I accompanied him until, as we drew level with the Hôtel des Quatre Saisons, he suddenly nodded to me and disappeared. For myself, I returned home, and came to the conclusion that, even had I met him at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I should have learnt no more from him than I had done at 5 o'clock, for the reason that I had no definite question to ask. It was bound to have been so. For me to formulate the query which I really wished to put was a simple impossibility. Polina spent the whole of that day either in walking about the park with the nurse and children, or in sitting in her own room. For a long while past she had avoided the General and had scarcely had a word to say to him, scarcely a word, I mean, on any serious topic. Yes, that I had noticed. Still, even though I was aware of the position in which the General was placed, it had never occurred to me that he would have any reason to avoid her, or to trouble her with family explanations. Indeed, when I was returning to the hotel, after my conversation with Astley, and chanced to meet Polina and the children, I could see that her face was as calm as though the family disturbances had never touched her. To my salute she responded with a slight bow, and I retired to my room in a very bad humour. Of course, since the affair with the Burmergelms, I had exchanged not a word with Polina, nor had with her any kind of intercourse. Yet I had been at my wits' end, for as time went on there was arising in me an ever-seething dissatisfaction. Even if she did not love me, she ought not to have trampled upon my feelings, nor to have accepted my confessions with such contempt, seeing that she must have been aware that I loved her. Of her own accord she had allowed me to tell her as much. Of course, the situation between us had arisen in a curious manner. About 2 months ago I had noticed that she had a desire to make me her friend, her confidant; that she was making trial of me for the purpose, but for some reason or another the desired result had never come about, and we had fallen into the present strange relations which had led me to address her as I had done. At the same time, if my love was distasteful to her, why had she not forbidden me to speak of it to her? But she had not so forbidden me. On the contrary, there had been occasions when she had even invited me to speak. Of course, this might have been done out of sheer wantonness, for I well knew (I had remarked it only too often) that after listening to what I had to say, and angering me almost beyond endurance, she loved suddenly to torture me with some fresh outburst of contempt and aloofness. Yet she must have known that I could not live without her. 3 days had elapsed since the affair with the Baron, and I could bear the severance no longer. When that afternoon I met her near the Casino, my heart almost made me faint, it beat so violently. She too could not live without me, for had she not said that she had need of me? Or had that too been spoken in jest? That she had a secret of some kind there could be no doubt. What she had said to the Grandmother had stabbed me to the heart. On 1,000 occasions I had challenged her to be open with me, nor could she have been ignorant that I was ready to give my very life for her. Yet always she had kept me at a distance with that contemptuous air of hers, or else she had demanded of me, in lieu of the life which I offered to lay at her feet, such escapades as I had perpetrated with the Baron. Ah! Was it not torture to me, all this? For could it be that her whole world was bound up with the Frenchman? What, too, about Mr. Astley? The affair was inexplicable throughout. My God, what distress it caused me! Arrived home, I, in a fit of frenzy, indited the following: Polina Alexandrovna, I can see that there is approaching us an exposure which will involve you too. For the last time I ask of you, have you, or have you not, any need of my life? If you have, then make such dispositions as you wish, and I shall always be discoverable in my room if required. If you have need of my life, write or send for me." I sealed the letter, and dispatched it by the hand of a corridor lackey, with orders to hand it to the addressee in person. Though I expected no answer, scarcely 3 minutes had elapsed before the lackey returned with the compliments of a certain person. Next, about 7 o'clock, I was sent for by the General. I found him in his study, apparently preparing to go out again, for his hat and stick were lying on the sofa. When I entered, he was standing in the middle of the room, his feet wide apart, and his head bent down. Also, he appeared to be talking to himself. But as soon as ever he saw me at the door, he came towards me in such a curious manner that involuntarily I retreated a step, and was for leaving the room. Whereupon he seized me by both hands, and drawing me towards the sofa, and seating himself thereon, he forced me to sit down on a chair opposite him. Then, without letting go of my hands, he exclaimed with quivering lips and a sparkle of tears on his eyelashes, "Oh, Alexis Ivanovitch, save me! Save me! Have some mercy upon me!" For a long time I could not make out what he meant, although he kept talking and talking, and constantly repeating to himself, "Have mercy! Mercy!" At length, however, I divined that he was expecting me to give him something in the nature of advice, or rather that, deserted by every one, and overwhelmed with grief and apprehension, he had bethought himself of my existence, and sent for me to relieve his feelings by talking and talking and talking. In fact, he was in such a confused and despondent state of mind that, clasping his hands together, he actually went down upon his knees and begged me to go to Mademoiselle Blanche, and beseech and advise her to return to him, and to accept him in marriage. "But, General," I exclaimed, "possibly Mademoiselle Blanche has scarcely even remarked my existence. What could I do with her?" It was in vain that I protested, for he could understand nothing that was said to him. Next he started talking about the grandmother, but always in a disconnected sort of fashion, his one thought being to send for the police. "In Russia," he said, suddenly boiling over with indignation, "or in any well-ordered state where there exists a government, old women like my mother are placed under proper guardianship. Yes, my good sir," he went on, relapsing into a scolding tone as he leapt to his feet and started to pace the room. "Do you not know this?" He seemed to be addressing some imaginary auditor in the corner. "Do you not know this, that in Russia old women like her are subjected to restraint, the devil take them?" Again he threw himself down upon the sofa. A minute later, though sobbing and almost breathless, he managed to gasp out that Mademoiselle Blanche had refused to marry him, for the reason that the grandmother had turned up in place of a telegram, and it was therefore clear that he had no inheritance to look for. Evidently he supposed that I had hitherto been in entire ignorance of all this. Again, when I referred to De Griers, the General made a gesture of despair. "He has gone away," he said, "and everything which I possess is mortgaged to him. I stand stripped to my skin. Even of the money which you brought me from Paris, I know not if 700 francs be left. Of course that sum will do to go on with, but as regards the future, I know nothing. I know nothing." "Then how will you pay your hotel bill?" I cried in consternation, "and what shall you do afterwards?" He looked at me vaguely, but it was clear that he had not understood, perhaps had not even heard, my questions. Then I tried to get him to speak of Polina and the children, but he only returned brief answers of "yes, yes," and again started to maunder about the Prince and the likelihood of the latter marrying Mademoiselle Blanche. "What on earth am I to do?" he concluded. "What on earth am I to do? Is this not ingratitude? Is it not sheer ingratitude?" And he burst into tears. Nothing could be done with such a man. Yet to leave him alone was dangerous, for something might happen to him. I withdrew from his rooms for a little while, but warned the nursemaid to keep an eye upon him, as well as exchanged a word with the corridor lackey, a very talkative fellow, who likewise promised to remain on the lookout. Hardly had I left the General when Potapitch approached me with a summons from the grandmother. It was now 8 o'clock, and she had returned from the casino after finally losing all that she possessed. I found her sitting in her chair, much distressed and evidently fatigued. Presently Martha brought her a cup of tea and forced her to drink it. Yet, even then I could detect in the old lady's tone and manner a great change. "Good evening, Alexis Ivanovitch," she said slowly, with her head drooping. "Pardon me for disturbing you again. Yes, you must pardon an old woman like myself. For I have left behind me all that I possess, nearly 100,000 roubles. You did quite right in declining to come with me this evening. Now I am without money, without a single groat. But I must not delay a moment. I must leave by the 9:30 train. I have sent for that English friend of yours, and am going to beg of him 3,000 francs for a week. Please try and persuade him to think nothing of it, nor yet to refuse me, for I am still a rich woman who possesses 3 villages and a couple of mansions. Yes, the money shall be found, for I have not yet squandered everything. I tell you this in order that he may have no doubts about— Ah, but here he is. Clearly he is a good fellow." True enough, Astley had come hot-foot on receiving the grandmother's appeal. Scarcely stopping even to reflect, and with scarcely a word, he counted out the 3,000 francs under a note of hand which she duly signed. Then, his business done, he bowed, and lost no time in taking his departure. "You too leave me, Alexis Ivanovitch," said the grandmother. "All my bones are aching, and I still have an hour in which to rest. Do not be hard upon me, old fool that I am. Never again shall I blame young people for being frivolous. I should think it wrong even to blame that unhappy general of yours. Nevertheless, I do not mean to let him have any of my money, which is all that he desires, for the reason that I look upon him as a perfect blockhead, and consider myself, simpleton though I be, at least wiser than he is. How surely does God visit old age, and punish it for its presumption! Well, good-bye. Martha, come and lift me up." However, I had a mind to see the old lady off, and moreover I was in an expectant frame of mind. Somehow I kept thinking that something was going to happen. Wherefore I could not rest quietly in my room, but stepped out into the corridor, and then into the Chestnut Avenue for a few minutes' stroll. My letter to Polina had been clear and firm, and in the present crisis, I felt sure, would prove final. I had heard of De Griers' departure, and however much Polina might reject me as a friend, she might not reject me altogether as a servant. She would need me to fetch and carry for her, and I was ready to do so. How could it have been otherwise? Towards the hour of the train's departure I hastened to the station, and put the grandmother into her compartment, she and her party occupying a reserved family saloon. "Thanks for your disinterested assistance," she said at parting. "Oh, and please remind Prascovia of what I said to her last night. I expect soon to see her." Then I returned home. As I was passing the door of the General's suite, I met the nursemaid, and inquired after her master. "There is nothing new to report, sir," she replied quietly. Nevertheless I decided to enter, and was just doing so, when I halted thunderstruck on the threshold, for before me I beheld the General and Mlle. Blanche laughing gaily at one another, while beside them on the sofa there was seated her mother. Clearly the General was almost out of his mind with joy, for he was talking all sorts of nonsense, and bubbling over with a long-drawn, nervous laugh, a laugh which twisted his face into innumerable wrinkles, and caused his eyes almost to disappear. Afterwards I learnt from Mlle. Blanche herself that, after dismissing the Prince and hearing of the General's tears, she bethought her of going to comfort the old man, and had just arrived for the purpose when I entered. Fortunately, the poor General did not know that his fate had been decided, that Mademoiselle had long ago packed her trunks in readiness for the first morning train to Paris. Hesitating a moment on the threshold, I changed my mind as to entering, and departed unnoticed. Ascending to my room, and opening the door, I perceived in the semi-darkness a figure seated on a chair in the corner by the window. The figure did not rise when I entered, so I approached it swiftly, peered at it closely, and felt my heart almost stop beating. The figure was Polina. Chapter 13. Chapter 14 of The Gambler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Gambler, by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by C.J. Hogarth. Chapter 14. The shock made me utter an exclamation. "What is the matter? What is the matter?" she asked in a strange voice. She was looking pale, and her eyes were dim. "What is the matter?" I re-echoed. "Why, the fact that you are here." "If I am here, I have come with all that I have to bring," she said. "Such has always been my way, as you shall presently see. Please light a candle." I did so, whereupon she rose, approached the table, and laid upon it an open letter. "Read it," she added. "It is De Griers' handwriting!" I cried as I seized the document. My hands were so tremulous that the lines on the pages danced before my eyes. Although, at this distance of time, I have forgotten the exact phraseology of the missive, I append, if not the precise words, at all events the general sense. "Mademoiselle," the document ran, "certain untoward circumstances compel me to depart in haste. Of course, you have of yourself remarked that hitherto I have always refrained from having any final explanation with you, for the reason that I could not well state the whole circumstances. And now to my difficulties the advent of the aged grandmother, coupled with her subsequent proceedings, has put the final touch. Also, the involved state of my affairs forbids me to write with any finality concerning those hopes of ultimate bliss upon which, for a long while past, I have permitted myself to feed. I regret the past, but at the same time hope that in my conduct you have never been able to detect anything that was unworthy of a gentleman and a man of honor. Having lost, however, almost the whole of my money in debts incurred by your stepfather, I find myself driven to the necessity of saving the remainder, wherefore I have instructed certain friends of mine in St. Petersburg to arrange for the sale of all the property which has been mortgaged to myself. At the same time, knowing that, in addition, your frivolous stepfather has squandered money which is exclusively yours, I have decided to absolve him from a certain moiety of the mortgages on his property, in order that you may be in a position to recover of him what you have lost, by suing him in legal fashion. I trust, therefore, that, as matters now stand, this action of mine may bring you some advantage. I trust also that this same action leaves me in the position of having fulfilled every obligation which is incumbent upon a man of honor and refinement. Rest assured that your memory will forever remain graven in my heart." "All this is clear enough," I commented. "Surely you did not expect aught else from him?" Somehow I was feeling annoyed. "I expected nothing at all from him," she replied, quietly enough to all outward seeming, yet with a note of irritation in her tone. "Long ago I made up my mind on the subject, for I could read his thoughts, and knew what he was thinking. He thought that possibly I should sue him, that one day I might become a nuisance." Here Polina halted for a moment and stood biting her lips. So of set purpose I redoubled my contemptuous treatment of him, and waited to see what he would do. If a telegram to say that we had become legatees had arrived from St. Petersburg, I should have flung at him a quittance for my foolish stepfather's debts, and then dismissed him. For a long time I have hated him. Even in earlier days he was not a man. And now, oh, how gladly I could throw those 50,000 roubles in his face, and spit in it, and then rub the spittle in. "But the document returning the 50,000-rouble mortgage, has the General got it? If so, possess yourself of it, and send it to De Griers." "No, no, the General has not got it." "Just as I expected. Well, what is the General going to do?" Then an idea suddenly occurred to me. "What about the grandmother?" I asked. Polina looked at me with impatience and bewilderment. "What makes you speak of her?" was her irritable inquiry. "I cannot go and live with her. Nor," she added hotly, "will I go down upon my knees to any one." "Why should you?" I cried. "Yet to think that you should have loved De Griers! The villain, the villain! But I will kill him in a duel. Where is he now?" "In Frankfurt, where he will be staying for the next 3 days." "Well, bid me do so, and I will go to him by the first train tomorrow," I exclaimed with enthusiasm. She smiled. "If you were to do that," she said, "he would merely tell you to be so good as to first return him the 50,000 francs. What, then, would be the use of having a quarrel with him? You talk sheer nonsense." I ground my teeth. "The question," I went on, "is how to raise the 50,000 francs. We cannot expect to find them lying about on the floor. Listen. What of Mr. Astley?" Even as I spoke, a new and strange idea formed itself in my brain. Her eyes flashed fire. "What? You yourself wish me to leave you for him?" she cried, with a scornful look and a proud smile. Never before had she addressed me thus. Then her head must have turned dizzy with emotion, for suddenly she seated herself upon the sofa, as though she were powerless any longer to stand. A flash of lightning seemed to strike me as I stood there. I could scarcely believe my eyes or my ears. She did love me, then! It was to me, and not to Mr. Astley, that she had turned. Although she, an unprotected girl, had come to me in my room, in an hotel room, and had probably compromised herself thereby, I had not understood. Then a second mad idea flashed into my brain. "Polina," I said, "give me but an hour. Wait here just 1 hour until I return. Yes, you must do so. Do you not see what I mean? Just stay here for that time." And I rushed from the room without so much as answering her look of inquiry. She called something after me, but I did not return. Sometimes it happens that the most insane thought, the most impossible conception, will become so fixed in one's head that at length one believes the thought or the conception to be reality. Moreover, if with the thought or the conception there is combined a strong, a passionate desire, one will come to look upon the said thought or conception as something fated, inevitable, and foreordained, something bound to happen. Whether by this there is connoted something in the nature of a combination of presentiments, or a great effort of will, or a self-annulment of one's true expectations, and so on, I do not know. But at all events that night saw happen to me, a night which I shall never forget, something in the nature of the miraculous. Although the occurrence can easily be explained by arithmetic, I still believe it to have been a miracle. Yet why did this conviction take such a hold upon me at the time, and remain with me ever since? Previously I had thought of the idea, not as an occurrence which was ever likely to come about, but as something which never could come about. The time was 11:15 o'clock when I entered the Casino in such a state of hope, though at the same time of agitation, as I had never before experienced. In the gaming rooms there were still a large number of people, but not half as many as had been present in the morning. At 11 o'clock there usually remained behind only the real, the desperate gamblers, persons for whom, at spas, there existed nothing beyond roulette, and who went thither for that alone. These gamesters took little note of what was going on around them, and were interested in none of the appurtenances of the season, but played from morning till night, and would have been ready to play through the night until dawn had that been possible. As it was, they used to disperse unwillingly when at midnight roulette came to an end. Likewise, as soon as ever roulette was drawing to a close and the head croupier had called les 3 derniers coups, most of them were ready to stake on the last 3 rounds all that they had in their pockets, and for the most part lost it. For my own part, I proceeded towards the table at which the Grandmother had lately sat, and, since the crowd around it was not very large, I soon obtained standing room among the ring of gamblers, while directly in front of me, on the green cloth, I saw marked the word "Passe." Passe was a row of numbers from 19 to 36 inclusive, while a row of numbers from 1 to 18 inclusive was known as manque. But what had that to do with me? I had not noticed, I had not so much as heard the numbers upon which the previous coup had fallen, and so took no bearings when I began to play, as in my place any systematic gambler would have done. No, I merely extended my stock of 20 10-gulden pieces, and threw them down upon the space passe, which happened to be confronting me. 22, called the croupier. I had won. I staked upon the same again, both my original stake and my winnings. 31, called the croupier. Again I had won, and was now in possession of 80 10-gulden pieces. Next I moved the whole 80 on to 12 middle numbers, a stake which, if successful, would bring me in a triple profit, but also involved a risk of 2 chances to 1. The wheel revolved, and stopped at 24. Upon this I was paid out notes and gold until I had by my side a total sum of 2,000 gulden. It was as in a fever that I moved the pile en bloc on to the red. Then suddenly I came to myself, though that was the only time during the evening's play when fear cast its cold spell over me, and showed itself in a trembling of the hands and knees. For with horror I had realized that I must win, and that upon that stake there depended all my life. "Rouge!" called the croupier. I drew a long breath, and hot shivers went coursing over my body. I was paid out my winnings in bank notes, amounting, of course, to a total of 4,000 florins, 800 gulden. I could still calculate the amounts. After that, I remember, I again staked 2,000 florins upon 12 middle numbers, and lost. Again I staked the whole of my gold with 800 gulden in notes, and lost. Then madness seemed to come upon me, and seizing my last 2,000 florins, I staked them upon 12 of the first numbers, wholly by chance, and at random, and without any sort of reckoning. Upon my doing so there followed a moment of suspense only comparable to that which Madame Blanchard must have experienced when in Paris she was descending earthwards from a balloon. "Cut!" called the croupier. Once more, with the addition of my original stake, I was in possession of 6,000 florins. Once more I looked around me like a conqueror. Once more I feared nothing as I threw down 4,000 of these florins upon the black. The croupiers glanced around them and exchanged a few words. The bystanders murmured expectantly. The black turned up. After that I do not exactly remember either my calculations or the order of my stakings. I only remember that, as in a dream, I won in one round 16,000 florins; that in the 3 following rounds I lost 12,000; that I moved the remainder, 4,000, on to pass, though quite unconscious of what I was doing. I was merely waiting, as it were, mechanically and without reflection for something, and won; and that finally, 4 times in succession, I lost. Yes, I can remember raking in money by thousands, but most frequently on the 12 middle numbers, to which I constantly adhered, and which kept appearing in a sort of regular order, first 3 or 4 times running, and then, after an interval of a couple of rounds, in another break of 3 or 4 appearances. Sometimes this astonishing regularity manifested itself in patches, a thing to upset all the calculations of note. Taking gamblers who play with a pencil and a memorandum book in their hands, fortune perpetrates some terrible jests at roulette. Since my entry, not more than half an hour could have elapsed. Suddenly a croupier informed me that I had won 30,000 florins, as well as that, since the latter was the limit for which at any one time the bank could make itself responsible, roulette at that table must close for the night. Accordingly, I caught up my pile of gold, stuffed it into my pocket, and grasping my sheaf of bank-notes, moved to the table in an adjoining salon where a second game of roulette was in progress. The crowd followed me in a body, and cleared a place for me at the table. After which I proceeded to stake as before, that is to say, at random and without calculating. What saved me from ruin I do not know. Of course there were times when fragmentary reckonings did come flashing into my brain. For instance, there were times when I attached myself for a while to certain figures and coups, though always leaving them, again before long, without knowing what I was doing. In fact, I cannot have been in possession of all my faculties, for I can remember the croupiers correcting my play more than once, owing to my having made mistakes of the gravest order. My brows were damp with sweat, and my hands were shaking. Also Poles came around me to proffer their services, but I heeded none of them. Nor did my luck fail me now. Suddenly there arose around me a loud din of talking and laughter. "Bravo! Bravo!" was the general shout, and some people even clapped their hands. I had raked in 30,000 florins, and again the bank had had to close for the night. "Go away now! Go away now!" a voice whispered to me on my right. The person who had spoken to me was a certain Jew of Frankfurt, a man who had been standing beside me the whole while, and occasionally helping me in my play. "Yes, for God's sake, go!" whispered a second voice in my left ear. Glancing around, I perceived that the second voice had come from a modestly, plainly dressed lady of rather less than 30, a woman whose face, though pale and sickly-looking, bore also very evident traces of former beauty. At the moment, I was stuffing the crumpled bank-notes into my pockets and collecting all the gold that was left on the table. Seizing up my last note for 500 gulden, I contrived to insinuate it, unperceived, into the hand of the pale lady. An overpowering impulse had made me do so, and I remember how her thin little fingers pressed mine in token of her lively gratitude. The whole affair was the work of a moment. Then, collecting my belongings, I crossed to where trente et quarante was being played, a game which could boast of a more aristocratic public, and was played with cards instead of with a wheel. At this diversion the bank made itself responsible for 100,000 thalers as the limit, but the highest stake allowable was, as in roulette, 4,000 florins. Although I knew nothing of the game, and I scarcely knew the stakes except those on black and red, I joined the ring of players while the rest of the crowd massed itself around me. At this distance of time I cannot remember whether I ever gave a thought to Polina. I seemed only to be conscious of a vague pleasure in seizing and raking in the bank-notes, which kept massing themselves in a pile before me. But, as ever, fortune seemed to be at my back. As though of set purpose, there came to my aid a circumstance which not infrequently repeats itself in gaming. The circumstance is that not infrequently luck attaches itself to, say, the red, and does not leave it for a space of, say, 10 or even 15 rounds in succession. 3 days ago I had heard that, during the previous week, there had been a run of 22 coups on the red, an occurrence never before known at roulette, so that men spoke of it with astonishment. Naturally enough, many deserted the red after a dozen rounds, and practically no one could now be found to stake upon it. Yet upon the black also, the antithesis of the red, no experienced gambler would stake anything, for the reason that every practised player knows the meaning of capricious fortune. That is to say, after the 16th or so success of the red, one would think that the 17th coup would inevitably fall upon the black. Wherefore, novices would be apt to back the latter in the 17th round, and even to double or treble their stakes upon it, only in the end to lose. Yet some whim or other led me, on remarking that the red had come up consecutively for 7 times, to attach myself to that colour. Probably this was mostly due to self-conceit, for I wanted to astonish the bystanders with the riskiness of my play. Also, I remember that, oh, strange sensation, I suddenly, and without any challenge from my own presumption, became obsessed with a desire to take risks. If the spirit has passed through a great many sensations, possibly it can no longer be sated with them, but grows more excited, and demands more sensations, and stronger ones, until at length it falls exhausted. Certainly, if the rules of the game had permitted even of my staking 50,000 florins at a time, I should have staked them. All of a sudden I heard exclamations arising that the whole thing was a marvel, since the red was turning up for the 14th time. "Monsieur a gagné 100,000 florins," a voice exclaimed beside me. I awoke to my senses. What? I had won 100,000 florins? If so, what more did I need to win? I grasped the bank-notes, stuffed them into my pockets, raked in the gold without counting it, and started to leave the casino. As I passed through the salons, people smiled to see my bulging pockets and unsteady gait, for the weight which I was carrying must have amounted to half a pood. Several hands I saw stretched out in my direction, and as I passed I filled them with all the money that I could grasp in my own. At length 2 Jews stopped me near the exit. "You are a bold young fellow," one said, "but mind you depart early tomorrow, as early as you can, for if you do not, you will lose everything that you have won." But I did not heed them. The avenue was so dark that it was barely possible to distinguish one's hand before one's face, while the distance to the hotel was half a verst or so. But I feared neither pickpockets nor highwaymen. Indeed, never since my boyhood have I done that. Also, I cannot remember what I thought about on the way. I only felt a sort of fearful pleasure. The pleasure of success, of conquest, of power. How can I best express it? Likewise, before me there flitted the image of Polina, and I kept remembering and reminding myself that it was to her I was going, that it was in her presence I should soon be standing, that it was she to whom I should soon be able to relate and show everything. Scarcely once did I recall what she had lately said to me, or the reason why I had left her, or all those varied sensations which I had been experiencing a bare hour and a half ago. No, those sensations seemed to be things of the past, to be things which had righted themselves and grown old, to be things concerning which we needed to trouble ourselves no longer, since for us life was about to begin anew. Yet I had just reached the end of the avenue, when there did come upon me a fear of being robbed or murdered. With each step the fear increased, until, in my terror, I almost started to run. Suddenly, as I issued from the avenue, there burst upon me the lights of the hotel, sparkling with a myriad lamps. Yes, thanks be to God, I had reached home. Running up to my room, I flung open the door of it. Polina was still on the sofa, with the lighted candle in front of her, and her hands clasped. As I entered, she stared at me in astonishment, for at the moment I must have presented a strange spectacle. All I did, however, was to halt before her and fling upon the table my burden of wealth. End of chapter 14. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 15 of The Gambler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Gambler by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by C.J. Hogarth. Chapter 15. I remember, too, how, without moving from her place, or changing her attitude, she gazed into my face. "I have won 200,000 francs," cried I, as I pulled out my last sheaf of bank-notes. The pile of paper currency occupied the whole table. I could not withdraw my eyes from it. Consequently, for a moment or two, Polina escaped my mind. Then I set myself to arrange the pile in order, and to sort the notes, and to mass the gold in a separate heap. That done, I left everything where it lay, and proceeded to pace the room with rapid strides, as I lost myself in thought. Then I darted to the table once more and began to recount the money, until all of a sudden, as though I had remembered something, I rushed to the door, and closed and double-locked it. Finally I came to a meditative halt before my little trunk. "Shall I put the money there until tomorrow?" I asked, turning sharply round to Polina as the recollection of her returned to me. She was still in her old place, still making not a sound, yet her eyes had followed every one of my movements. Somehow, in her face there was a strange expression, an expression which I did not like. I think that I shall not be wrong if I say that it indicated sheer hatred. Impulsively I approached her. "Polina," I said, "here are 25,000 florins, 50,000 francs, or more. Take them, and tomorrow throw them in De Griers' face." She returned no answer. "Or, if you should prefer," I continued, "let me take them to him myself tomorrow. Yes, early tomorrow morning. Shall I?" Then all at once she burst out laughing, and laughed for a long while. With astonishment and a feeling of offence I gazed at her. Her laughter was too like the derisive merriment which she had so often indulged in of late, merriment which had broken forth always at the time of my most passionate explanations. At length she ceased, and frowned at me from under her eyebrows. "I am not going to take your money," she said contemptuously. "Why not?" I cried. "Why not, Polina?" "Because I am not in the habit of receiving money for nothing." "But I am offering it to you as a friend, in the same way I would offer you my very life." Upon this she threw me a long, questioning glance, as though she were seeking to probe me to the depths. "You are giving too much for me," she remarked with a smile. "The beloved of De Griers is not worth 50,000 francs." "Oh, Polina, how can you speak so?" I exclaimed reproachfully. "Am I De Griers?" "You?" she cried, with her eyes suddenly flashing. "Why, I hate you. Yes, yes, I hate you. I love you no more than I do De Griers." Then she buried her face in her hands, and relapsed into hysterics. I darted to her side. Somehow I had an intuition of something having happened to her which had nothing to do with myself. She was like a person temporarily insane. "Buy me, would you? Would you? Would you buy me for 50,000 francs as De Griers did?" she gasped between her convulsive sobs. I clasped her in my arms, kissed her hands and feet, and fell upon my knees before her. Presently the hysterical fit passed away, and, laying her hands upon my shoulders, she gazed for a while into my face as though trying to read it. Something I said to her, but it was clear that she did not hear it. Her face looked so dark and despondent that I began to fear for her reason. At length she drew me towards herself, a trustful smile playing over her features, and then as suddenly she pushed me away again as she eyed me dimly. Finally she threw herself upon me in an embrace. "Do you love me?" she said. "Do you? You who were willing even to quarrel with the Baron at my bidding?" Then she laughed as though something dear but laughable had recurred to her memory. Yes, she laughed and wept at the same time. What was I to do? I was like a man in a fever. I remember that she began to say something to me, though what I do not know, since she spoke with a feverish lisp, as though she were trying to tell me something very quickly. At intervals, too, she would break off into the smile which I was beginning to dread. "No, no," she kept repeating. "You are my dear one. You are the man I trust." Again she laid her hands upon my shoulders, and again she gazed at me as she reiterated, "You love me. You love me? Will you always love me?" I could not take my eyes off her. Never before had I seen her in this mood of humility and affection. True, the mood was the outcome of hysteria, but— All of a sudden she noticed my ardent gaze, and smiled slightly. The next moment, for no apparent reason, she began to talk of Astley. She continued talking and talking about him, but I could not make out all she said, more particularly when she was endeavouring to tell me of something or other which had happened recently. On the whole, she appeared to be laughing at Astley, for she kept repeating that he was waiting for her, and did I know whether, even at that moment, he was not standing beneath the window? "Yes, yes, he is there," she said. "Open the window, and see if he is not." She pushed me in that direction. Yet no sooner did I make a movement to obey her behest than she burst into laughter, and I remained beside her, and she embraced me. "Shall we go away tomorrow?" presently she asked, as though some disturbing thought had recurred to her recollection. "How would it be if we were to try and overtake Grandmamma? I think we should do so at Berlin. And what think you she would have to say to us when we caught her up, and her eyes first lit upon us? What, too, about Mr. Astley? He would not leap from the Schlangenberg for my sake. No, of that I am very sure." And she laughed. "Do you know where he is going next year? He says he intends to go to the North Pole for scientific investigations, and has invited me to go with him. He also says that we Russians know nothing, can do nothing, without European help. But he is a good fellow all the same. For instance, he does not blame the General in the matter, but declares that Mademoiselle Blanche, that love—but no, I do not know, I do not know." She stopped suddenly, as though she had said her say, and was feeling bewildered. "What poor creatures these people are! How sorry I am for them, and for Grandmamma! But when are you going to kill De Griers? Surely you do not intend actually to murder him? You fool! Do you suppose that I should allow you to fight De Griers? Nor shall you kill the Baron?" Here she burst out laughing. "How absurd you looked when you were talking to the Burmergelms! I was watching you all the time, watching you from where I was sitting, and how unwilling you were to go when I sent you. Oh, how I laughed and laughed!" Then she kissed and embraced me again. Again she pressed her face to mine with tender passion, yet I neither saw nor heard her, for my head was in a whirl. It must have been about 7 o'clock in the morning when I awoke. Daylight had come, and Polina was sitting by my side, a strange expression on her face, as though she had seen a vision and was unable to collect her thoughts. She, too, had just awoken, and was now staring at the money on the table. My head ached. It felt heavy. I attempted to take Polina's hand, but she pushed me from her and leapt from the sofa. The dawn was full of mist, for rain had fallen, yet she moved to the window, opened it, and, leaning her elbows upon the window-sill, thrust out her head and shoulders to take the air. In this position did she remain for several minutes, without ever looking round at me, or listening to what I was saying. Into my head there came the uneasy thought, what is to happen now? How is it all to end? Suddenly Polina rose from the window, approached the table, and looking at me with an expression of infinite aversion, said with lips which quivered with anger, "Well, are you going to hand me over my 50,000 francs?" "Polina, you say that again? Again?" I exclaimed. "You have changed your mind, then? You are sorry you ever promised them?" On the table where the previous night I had counted the money there still was lying the packet of 25,000 florins. I handed it to her. "The francs are mine, then, are they? They are mine?" she inquired viciously, as she balanced the money in her hands. "Yes, they have always been yours," I said. "Then take your 50,000 francs," and she hurled them full in my face. The packet burst as she did so, and the floor became strewed with banknotes. The instant that the deed was done she rushed from the room. At that moment she cannot have been in her right mind. Yet what was the cause of her temporary aberration I cannot say. For a month past she had been unwell. Yet what had brought about this present condition of mind, above all things, this outburst? Had it come of wounded pride? Had it come of despair over her decision to come to me? Had it come of the fact that, presuming too much on my good fortune, I had seemed to be intending to desert her, even as De Griers had done, when once I had given her the 50,000 francs? But on my honour, I had never cherished any such intention. What was at fault, I think, was her own pride, which kept urging her not to trust me, but rather to insult me, even though she had not realized the fact. In her eyes I corresponded to De Griers, and therefore had been condemned for a fault not wholly my own. Her mood of late had been a sort of delirium, a sort of light-headedness. That I knew full well. Yet never had I sufficiently taken it into consideration. Perhaps she would not pardon me now? Ah, but this was the present. What about the future? Her delirium and sickness were not likely to make her forget what she had done in bringing me De Griers' letter. No, she must have known what she was doing when she brought it. Somehow I contrived to stuff the pile of notes and gold under the bed, to cover them over, and then to leave the room some 10 minutes after Polina. I felt sure that she had returned to her own room. Wherefore I intended quietly to follow her, and to ask the nursemaid who opened the door how her mistress was. Judge, therefore, of my surprise when, meeting the domestic on the stairs, she informed me that Polina had not yet returned, and that she, the domestic, was at that moment on her way to my room in quest of her. "Mademoiselle left me but 10 minutes ago," I said. "What can have become of her?" The nursemaid looked at me reproachfully. Already sundry rumours were flying about the hotel. Both in the office of the commissionaire and in that of the landlord it was whispered that, at 7 o'clock that morning, the Fraulein had left the hotel, and set off, despite the rain, in the direction of the Hôtel d'Angleterre. From words and hints let fall I could see that the fact of Polina having spent the night in my room was now public property. Also, sundry rumours were circulating concerning the General's family affairs. It was known that last night he had gone out of his mind, and paraded the hotel in tears. Also that the old lady who had arrived was his mother, and that she had come from Russia on purpose to forbid her son's marriage with Mademoiselle de Cominges, as well as to cut him out of her will if he should disobey her. Also that because he had disobeyed her, she had squandered all her money at roulette in order to have nothing more to leave to him. "Oh, these Russians!" exclaimed the landlord, with an angry toss of the head, while the bystanders laughed and the clerk betook himself to his accounts. Also, every one had learnt about my winnings. Karl, the corridor lackey, was the first to congratulate me. But with these folk I had nothing to do. My business was to set off at full speed to the Hôtel Angleterre. As yet it was early for Mr. Astley to receive visitors. But as soon as he learnt that it was I who had arrived, he came out into the corridor to meet me, and stood looking at me in silence with his steel-grey eyes as he waited to hear what I had to say. I inquired after Polina. "She is ill," he replied, still looking at me with his direct, unwavering gaze. "And she is in your rooms?" "Yes, she is in my rooms." "Then you are minded to keep her there?" "Yes, I am minded to keep her there." "But, Mr. Astley, that will raise a scandal. It ought not to be allowed. Besides, she is very ill. Perhaps you had not remarked that?" "Yes, I have. It was I who told you about it. Had she not been ill, she would not have gone and spent the night with you." "Then you know all about it?" "Yes, for last night she was to have accompanied me to the house of a relative of mine. Unfortunately, being ill, she made a mistake, and went to your rooms instead." "Indeed? Then I wish you joy, Mr. Astley. Apropos, you have reminded me of something. Were you beneath my window last night? Every moment Mademoiselle Polina kept telling me to open the window and see if you were there, after which she always smiled." "Indeed? No, I was not there, but I was waiting in the corridor, and walking about the hotel." "She ought to see a doctor, you know, Mr. Astley." "Yes, she ought. I have sent for one, and if she dies I shall hold you responsible." This surprised me. "Pardon me," I replied, "but what do you mean?" "Never mind. Tell me if it is true that last night you won 200,000 thalers." "No, I won 100,000 florins." "Good heavens! Then I suppose you will be off to Paris this morning?" "Why?" "Because all Russians who have grown rich go to Paris," explained Astley, as though he had read the fact in a book. "But what could I do in Paris in summer time? I love her, Mr. Astley. Surely you know that." "Indeed? I am sure that you do not. Moreover, if you were to stay here, you would lose everything that you possess, and have nothing left with which to pay your expenses in Paris. Well, good-bye now. I feel sure that to-day will see you gone from here." "Good-bye. But I am not going to Paris. Likewise, pardon me, what is to become of this family? I mean that the affair of the General and Mademoiselle Polina will soon be all over the town." "I dare say. Yet I hardly suppose that it will break the General's heart. Moreover, Mademoiselle Polina has a perfect right to live where she chooses. In short, we may say that, as a family, this family has ceased to exist." I departed, and found myself smiling at the Englishman's strange assurance that I should soon be leaving for Paris. "I suppose he means to shoot me in a duel, should Polina die. Yes, that is what he intends to do." Now, although I was honestly sorry for Polina, it is a fact that from the moment when, the previous night, I had approached the gaming-table, and begun to rake in the packets of bank-notes, my love for her had entered upon a new plane. Yes, I can say that now, although at the time I was barely conscious of it. Was I, then, at heart a gambler? Did I, after all, love Polina not so very much? No, no. As God is my witness, I loved her. Even when I was returning home from Mr. Astley's, my suffering was genuine, and my self-reproach sincere. But presently I was to go through an exceedingly strange and ugly experience. I was proceeding to the General's rooms, when I heard a door near me open, and a voice call me by name. It was Mademoiselle's mother, the Widow de Cominges, who was inviting me, in her daughter's name, to enter. I did so, whereupon I heard a laugh and a little cry proceed from the bedroom (the pair occupied a suite of 2 apartments), where Mademoiselle Blanche was just arising. "Ah, c'est lui! Viens donc, bête! Is it true that you have won a mountain of gold and silver? J'aimerais mieux l'or." "Yes," I replied with a smile. "How much?" 100,000 florins. "Bibi, comme tu es bête!" "Come in here, for I can't hear you where you are now." "Nous ferons bonbons, n'est-ce pas?" Entering her room, I found her lolling under a pink satin coverlet, and revealing a pair of swarthy, wonderfully healthy shoulders such as one sees in dreams, shoulders covered over with a white cambric nightgown, which, trimmed with lace, stood out, in striking relief, against the darkness of her skin. "Mon fils, as-tu de coeur?" she cried when she saw me, and then giggled. Her laugh had always been a very cheerful one, and at times it even sounded sincere. "Tout autre," I began, paraphrasing Corneille. "See here," she prattled on, "please search for my stockings, and help me to dress. Aussi, si tu n'es pas trop bête, je te prends à Paris." "I am just off, let me tell you." "This moment?" In half an hour. True enough, everything stood ready packed, trunks, portmanteau, and all. Coffee had long been served.
Eh bien, tu verras Paris. Dis donc, qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un utchitel? Tu étais bien bête quand tu étais utchitel.
Where are my stockings? Please help me to dress. And she lifted up a really ravishing foot, small, swarthy, and not misshapen like the majority of feet, which look dainty only in bottines. I laughed, and started to draw on to the foot a silk stocking, while Mademoiselle Blanche sat on the edge of the bed and chattered.
Eh bien, que feras-tu si je prends avec moi?
First of all, I must have 50,000 francs, and you shall give them to me at Frankfurt. Then we will go on to Paris, where we will live together,
Et je te ferai voir des étoiles en plein jour.
Yes, you shall see such women as your eyes have never lit upon. Stop a moment. If I were to give you those 50,000 francs, what should I have left for myself? Another 100,000 francs, please to remember. Besides, I could live with you in your rooms for a month, or even for 2, or even for longer, but it would not take us more than 2 months to get through 50,000 francs. For look you,
Je suis bon enfant, et tu verras des étoiles.
You may be sure. What, you mean to say that we should spend the whole in 2 months? Certainly. Does that surprise you very much? Ah, vil esclave! Why, 1 month of that life would be better than all your previous existence. 1 month.
Et après, le déluge. Mais tu ne peux comprendre.
Va! Away, away! You are not worth it.
Ah! Que fais-tu?
For, while drawing on the other stocking, I had felt constrained to kiss her. Immediately she shrunk back, kicked me in the face with her toes, and turned me neck and crop out of the room.
Eh bien, mon utchitel.
She called after me,
Je t'attends, si tu veux.
I start in a quarter of an hour's time. I returned to my own room with my head in a whirl. It was not my fault that Polina had thrown a packet in my face, and preferred Mr. Astley to myself. A few banknotes were still fluttering about the floor, and I picked them up. At that moment the door opened, and the landlord appeared, a person who, until now, had never bestowed upon me so much as a glance. He had come to know if I would prefer to move to a lower floor, to a suite which had just been tenanted by Count V. For a moment I reflected. "No!" I shouted. "My account, please, for in 10 minutes I shall be gone." To Paris, I added to myself. Every man of birth must make her acquaintance. Within a quarter of an hour all 3 of us were seated in a family compartment, Mademoiselle Blanche, the widow de Cominges, and myself. Mademoiselle kept laughing hysterically as she looked at me, and Madame re-echoed her. But I did not feel so cheerful. My life had broken in 2, and yesterday had infected me with a habit of staking my all upon a card. Although it might be that I had failed to win my stake, that I had lost my senses, that I desired nothing better, I felt that the scene was to be changed only for a time. Within a month from now, I kept thinking to myself, I shall be back again in Roulettenberg, and then I mean to have it out with you, Mr. Astley. Yes, as now I look back at things, I remember that I felt greatly depressed, despite the absurd gigglings of the egregious Blanche. "What is the matter with you? How dull you are!" she cried at length as she interrupted her laughter to take me seriously to task. "Come, come, we are going to spend your 200,000 francs for you."
Et tu seras heureux comme un petit roi.
I myself will tie your tie for you and introduce you to Hortense, and when we have spent your money you shall return here and break the bank again. What did those 2 Jews tell you? That the thing most needed is daring, and that you possess it? Consequently, this is not the first time that you will be hurrying to Paris with money in your pocket.
Quand, moi, je veux 50,000 francs de rente, et alors?
But what about the General? I interrupted. The General? You know well enough that at about this hour every day he goes to buy me a bouquet. On this occasion I took care to tell him that he must hunt for the choicest of flowers, and when he returns home the poor fellow will find the bird flown. Possibly he may take wing in pursuit. And if so, I shall not be sorry, for he could be useful to me in Paris, and Mr. Astley will pay his debts here." In this manner did I depart for the gay city. End of chapter 15. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 16 of The Gambler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Gambler, by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by C.J. Hogarth. Chapter 16. Of Paris, what am I to say? The whole proceeding was a delirium, a madness. I spent a little over 3 weeks there, and during that time saw my 100,000 francs come to an end. I speak only of the 100,000 francs, for the other 100,000 I gave to Mademoiselle Blanche in pure cash. That is to say, I handed her 50,000 francs at Frankfurt, and 3 days later, in Paris, advanced her another 50,000 on note of hand. Nevertheless, a week had not elapsed ere she came to me for more money. "Et les 100,000 francs qui nous restent," she added, "tu les mangeras avec moi, mon utchitel." Yes, she always called me her utchitel. A person more economical, grasping, and mean than Mademoiselle Blanche one could not imagine. But this was only as regards her own money. My 100,000 francs, as she explained to me later, she needed to set up her establishment in Paris, so that once and for all I may be on a decent footing, and proof against any stones which may be thrown at me, at all events for a long time to come. Nevertheless, I saw nothing of those 100,000 francs for my own purse, which she inspected daily, never managed to amass in it more than 100 francs at a time, and generally the sum did not reach even that figure. "What do you want with money?" she would say to me with air of absolute simplicity, and I never disputed the point. Nevertheless, though she fitted out her flat very badly with the money, the fact did not prevent her from saying when, later, she was showing me over the rooms of her new abode, "See what care and taste can do with the most wretched of means." However, her wretchedness had cost 50,000 francs, while with the remaining 50,000 she purchased a carriage and horses. Also, we gave a couple of balls, evening parties attended by Hortense and Lisette and Cléopatre, who were women remarkable both for the number of their liaisons and, though only in some cases, for their good looks. At these reunions I had to play the part of host, to meet and entertain fat mercantile parvenus, who were impossible by reason of their rudeness and braggadocio, colonels of various kinds, hungry authors, and journalistic hacks, all of whom disported themselves in fashionable tail-coats and pale yellow gloves, and displayed such an aggregate of conceit and gasconade as would be unthinkable even in St. Petersburg, which is saying a great deal. They used to try to make fun of me, but I would console myself by drinking champagne and then lolling in a retiring room. Nevertheless, I found it deadly work. "C'est un utchitel," Blanche would say of me, "qui a gagné 200,000 francs, and but for me would have had not a notion how to spend them. Presently he will have to return to his tutoring. Does any one know of a vacant post? You know, one must do something for him." I had the more frequent recourse to champagne in that I constantly felt depressed and bored, owing to the fact that I was living in the most bourgeois commercial milieu imaginable, a milieu wherein every sou was counted and grudged. Indeed, 2 weeks had not elapsed before I perceived that Blanche had no real affection for me, even though she dressed me in elegant clothes, and herself tied my tie each day. In short, she utterly despised me. But that caused me no concern. Blasé and inert, I spent my evenings generally at the Château des Fleurs, where I would get fuddled and then dance the can-can, which in that establishment was a very indecent performance, with éclat. At length the time came when Blanche had drained my purse dry. She had conceived an idea that during the term of our residence together it would be well if I were always to walk behind her with a paper and pencil, in order to jot down exactly what she spent, what she had saved, what she was paying out, and what she was laying by. Well, Of course I could not fail to be aware that this would entail a battle over every 10 francs. So, although for every possible objection that I might make she had prepared a suitable answer, she soon saw that I made no objections, and therefore had to start disputes herself. That is to say, she would burst out into tirades which were met only with silence, as I lolled on a sofa and stared fixedly at the ceiling. This greatly surprised her. At first she imagined that it was due merely to the fact that I was a fool, un uchitel. Wherefore she would break off her harangue in the belief that, being too stupid to understand, I was a hopeless case. Then she would leave the room, but return 10 minutes later to resume the contest. This continued throughout her squandering of my money, a squandering altogether out of proportion to our means. An example is the way in which she changed her first pair of horses for a pair which cost 16,000 francs. "Bibi," she said on the latter occasion as she approached me, "surely you are not angry?" "No, I am merely tired," was my reply as I pushed her from me. This seemed to her so curious that straightway she seated herself by my side. "You see," she went on, "I decided to spend so much upon these horses only because I can easily sell them again. They would go at any time for 20,000 francs. "Yes, yes, they are splendid horses, and you have got a splendid turnout. I am quite content. Let me hear no more of the matter." "Then you are not angry?" "No. Why should I be? You are wise to provide yourself with what you need, for it will all come in handy in the future. Yes, I quite see the necessity of your establishing yourself on a good basis, for without it you will never earn your million. My 100,000 francs I look upon merely as a beginning, as a mere drop in the bucket." Blanche, who had by no means expected such declarations from me, but rather an uproar and protests, was rather taken aback. "Well, well, what a man you are!" she exclaimed. "Mais tu as l'esprit pour comprendre. Sais-tu, mon garçon, although you are a tutor, you ought to have been born a prince. Are you not sorry that your money should be going so quickly?" "No. The quicker it goes, the better." "Mais sais-tu, mais dis donc, are you really rich? Mais sais-tu, you have too much contempt for money. Qu'est-ce que tu feras après, dis donc?" "Après I shall go to Hamburg, and win another 100,000 francs." "Oui, oui, c'est ça, c'est magnifique. Ah, I know you will win them, and bring them to me when you have done so. Dis donc, you will end by making me love you. Since you are what you are, I mean to love you all the time and never to be unfaithful to you. You see, I have not loved you before parce que je croyais que tu n'es qu'un utchitel, quelque chose comme un laquais, n'est-ce pas? Yet all the time I have been true to you, parce que je suis bon fils." "You lie," I interrupted. "Did I not see you the other day with Albert, with that black-jowled officer?" "Oh, mais tu es—" "Yes, you are lying right enough. But what makes you suppose that I should be angry? Rubbish! Il faut que jeunesse se passe. Even if that officer were here now, I should refrain from putting him out of the room if I thought you really cared for him. Only, mind you, do not give him any of my money. You hear? You say, do you, that you would not be angry? Mais tu es un vrai philosophe, sais-tu?" "Oui, un vrai philosophe. Eh bien, je t'aimerai, je t'aimerai. Tu verras, tu seras content." True enough. From that time onward she seemed to attach herself only to me, and in this manner we spent our last 10 days together. The promised étoile I did not see, but in other respects she, to a certain extent, kept her word. Moreover, she introduced me to Hortense, who was a remarkable woman in her way, and known among us as Thérèse Philosophe. But I need not enlarge further, for to do so would require a story to itself, and entail a colouring which I am loath to impart to the present narrative. The point is that with all my faculties I desired the episode to come to an end as speedily as possible. Unfortunately, our 100,000 francs lasted us, as I have said, for very nearly a month, which greatly surprised me. At all events, Blanche bought herself articles to the tune of 80,000 francs, and the rest sufficed just to meet our expenses of living. Towards the close of the affair, Blanche grew almost frank with me, At least, she scarcely lied to me at all, declaring amongst other things that none of the debts which she had been obliged to incur were going to fall upon my head. "I have purposely refrained from making you responsible for my bills or borrowings," she said, "for the reason that I am sorry for you. Any other woman in my place would have done so, and have let you go to prison. See, then, how much I love you, and how good-hearted I am. Think, too, what this accursed marriage with the General is going to cost me." True enough, the marriage took place. It did so at the close of our month together, and I am bound to suppose that it was upon the ceremony that the last remnants of my money were spent. With it the episode, that is to say my sojourn with the Frenchwoman, came to an end, and I formally retired from the scene. It happened thus. A week after we had taken up our abode in Paris there arrived thither the General. He came straight to see us, and thenceforward lived with us practically as our guest, though he had a flat of his own as well. Blanche met him with merry badinage and laughter, and even threw her arms around him. In fact, she managed it so that he had to follow everywhere in her train, whether when promenading on the boulevards, or when driving, or when going to the theatre, or when paying calls. And this use which she made of him quite satisfied the General. Still of imposing appearance and presence, as well as of fair height, he had a dyed moustache and whiskers (he had formerly been in the cuirassiers), and a handsome, though a somewhat wrinkled face. Also, his manners were excellent, and he could carry a frock-coat well, the more so since in Paris he took to wearing his orders. To promenade the boulevards with such a man was not only a thing possible, but also, so to speak, a thing advisable, and with this programme the good but foolish General had not a fault to find. The truth is that he had never counted upon this programme when he came to Paris to seek us out. On that occasion he had made his appearance nearly shaking with terror, for he had supposed that Blanche would at once raise an outcry and have him put from the door. Wherefore he was the more enraptured at the turn that things had taken, and spent the month in a state of senseless ecstasy. Already I had learnt that after our unexpected departure from Roulettenberg he had had a sort of fit, that he had fallen into a swoon, and spent a week in a species of garrulous delirium. Doctors had been summoned to him, but he had broken away from them, and suddenly taken a train to Paris. Of course Blanche's reception of him had acted as the best of all possible cures, but for long enough he carried the marks of his affliction, despite his present condition of rapture and delight. To think clearly, or even to engage in any serious conversation, had now become impossible for him. He could only ejaculate after each word, and then nod his head in confirmation. Sometimes, also, he would laugh, but only in a nervous, hysterical sort of a fashion, while at other times he would sit for hours, looking as black as night, with his heavy eyebrows knitted. Of much that went on he remained wholly oblivious, for he grew extremely absent-minded, and took to talking to himself. Only Blanche could awake him to any semblance of life. His fits of depression and moodiness in corners always meant either that he had not seen her for some while, or that she had gone out without taking him with her, or that she had omitted to caress him before departing. When in this condition, he would refuse to say what he wanted, nor had he the least idea that he was thus sulking and moping. Next, after remaining in this condition for an hour or two, this I remarked on 2 occasions when Blanche had gone out for the day, probably to see Albert, he would begin to look about him, and to grow uneasy, and to hurry about with an air as though he had suddenly remembered something, and must try and find it; after which, not perceiving the object of his search, nor succeeding in recalling what that object had been, he would as suddenly relapse into oblivion, and continue so until the reappearance of Blanche, merry, wanton, half-dressed, and laughing her strident laugh as she approached to pet him, and even to kiss him, though the latter reward he seldom received. Once he was so overjoyed at her doing so that he burst into tears. Even I myself was surprised. From the first moment of his arrival in Paris, Blanche set herself to plead with me on his behalf, and at such times she even rose to heights of eloquence, saying that it was for me she had abandoned him, though she had almost become his betrothed and promised to become so; that it was for her sake he had deserted his family; that having been in his service I ought to remember the fact, and to feel ashamed. To all this I would say nothing, however much she chattered on, until at length I would burst out laughing, and the incident would come to an end. At first, as I have said, she had thought me a fool, but since she had come to deem me a man of sense and sensibility. In short, I had the happiness of calling her better nature into play, for though at first I had not deemed her so, she was in reality a kind-hearted woman after her own fashion. "You are good and clever," she said to me towards the finish, "and my one regret is that you are also wrong-headed. You will never be a rich man." "Un vrai Russe, un Kalmuk," she usually called me. Several times she sent me to give the General an airing in the streets, even as she might have done with a lackey and her spaniel. But I preferred to take him to the theatre, to the bal mobile, and to restaurants. For this purpose she usually allowed me some money, though the General had a little of his own, and enjoyed taking out his purse before strangers. Once I had to use actual force to prevent him from buying a phaeton at a price of 700 francs, after a vehicle had caught his fancy in the Palais Royal as seeming to be a desirable present for Blanche. What could she have done with a 700-franc phaeton? And the General possessed in the world but 1,000 francs. The origin even of those francs I could never determine, but imagined them to have emanated from Mr. Astley, the more so since the latter had paid the family's hotel bill. As for what view the General took of myself, I think that he never divined the footing on which I stood with Blanche. True, he had heard in a dim sort of way that I had won a good deal of money, but more probably he supposed me to be acting as secretary, or even as a kind of servant, to his inamorata. At all events, he continued to address me in his old haughty style as my superior. At times he even took it upon himself to scold me. One morning in particular he started to sneer at me over our matutinal coffee. Though not a man prone to take offence, he suddenly, and for some reason of which to this day I am ignorant, fell out with me. Of course, even he himself did not know the reason. To put things shortly, he began a speech which had neither beginning nor ending, and cried out "à bâton rompu," that I was a boy whom he would soon put to rights, and so forth, and so forth. Yet no one could understand what he was saying, and at length Blanche exploded in a burst of laughter. Finally something appeased him, and he was taken out for his walk. More than once, however, I noticed that his depression was growing upon him, that he seemed to be feeling the want of somebody or something, that despite Blanche's presence he was missing some person in particular. Twice on these occasions did he plunge into a conversation with me, though he could not make himself intelligible, and only went on rambling about the service, his late wife, his home, and his property. Every now and then, also, some particular word would please him, whereupon he would repeat it 100 times in the day, even though the word happened to express neither his thoughts nor his feelings. Again, I would try to get him to talk about his children, but always he cut me short in his old snappish way, and passed to another subject. "Yes, yes, my children," was all that I could extract from him. "Yes, you are right in what you have said about them." Only once did he disclose his real feelings. That was when we were taking him to the theatre, and suddenly he exclaimed, "My unfortunate children! Yes, sir, they are unfortunate children." Once, too, when I chanced to mention Polina, he grew quite bitter against her. "She is an ungrateful woman!" he exclaimed. "She is a bad and ungrateful woman. She has broken up a family. If there were laws here, I would have her impaled. Yes, I would." As for De Griers, the General would not have his name mentioned. "He has ruined me," he would say. "He has robbed me and cut my throat. For 2 years he was a perfect nightmare to me. For months at a time he never left me in my dreams. Do not speak of him again." It was now clear to me that Blanche and he were on the point of coming to terms, yet, true to my usual custom, I said nothing. At length Blanche took the initiative in explaining matters. She did so a week before we parted. "Il a du chance," she prattled, "for the grandmother is now really ill, and therefore bound to die. Mr. Astley has just sent a telegram to say so, and you will agree with me that the General is likely to be her heir. Even if he should not be so, he will not come amiss, since in the first place he has his pension, and in the second place he will be content to live in a back room, whereas I shall be Madame Générale, and get into a good circle of society," she was always thinking of this, "and become a Russian chatelaine. Yes, I shall have a mansion of my own, and peasants, and 1,000,000 of money at my back. But suppose he should prove jealous? He might demand all sorts of things, you know. Do you follow me?" "Oh dear, no! How ridiculous that would be of him! Besides, I have taken measures to prevent it. You need not be alarmed. That is to say, I have induced him to sign notes of hand in Albert's name. Consequently, at any time I could get him punished. Isn't he ridiculous? Very well, then. Marry him." And in truth she did so, though the marriage was a family one only, and involved no pomp or ceremony. In fact, she invited to the nuptials none but Albert and a few other friends. Hortense, Cléopatre, and the rest she kept firmly at a distance. As for the bridegroom, he took a great interest in his new position. Blanche herself tied his tie, and Blanche herself pomaded him, with the result that, in his frock-coat and white waistcoat, he looked quite comme il faut. "Il est, pourtant, très comme il faut," Blanche remarked when she issued from his room, as though the idea that he was très comme il faut had impressed even her. For myself, I had so little knowledge of the minor details of the affair, and took part in it so much as a supine spectator, that I have forgotten most of what passed on this occasion. I only remember that Blanche and the widow figured at it, not as de Cominges, but as du Placet. Why they had hitherto been de Cominges I do not know. I only know that this entirely satisfied the General, that he liked the name du Placet, even better than he had liked the name de Cominges. On the morning of the wedding he paced the salon in his gala attire, and kept repeating to himself with an air of great gravity and importance, "Mademoiselle Blanche du Placet, Mademoiselle Blanche du Placet, du Placet." He beamed with satisfaction as he did so. Both in the church and at the wedding breakfast he remained not only pleased and contented, but even proud. She too underwent a change, for now she assumed an air of added dignity. "I must behave altogether differently," she confided to me with a serious air. "Yet, mark you, there is a tiresome circumstance of which I had never before thought, which is, how best to pronounce my new family name. Zagoriansky, Zagoziansky, Madame la Générale de Sago, Madame la Générale de 14 consonants? Oh, these infernal Russian names! The last of them would be the best to use, don't you think?" At length the time had come for us to part, and Blanche, the egregious Blanche, shed real tears as she took her leave of me. "Tu étais bon enfant," she said with a sob. "Je te croyais bête, et tu en avais l'air. But it suited you." Then, having given me a final handshake, she exclaimed, "Attends!" Whereafter, running into her boudoir, she brought me thence 2,000-franc notes. I could scarcely believe my eyes. "They may come in handy for you," she explained, "for, though you are a very learned tutor, you are a very stupid man. More than 2,000 francs, however, I am not going to give you, for the reason that, if I did so, you would gamble them all away. Now good-bye. Nous serons toujours bons amis, and if you win again, do not fail to come to me, et tu seras heureux." I myself had still 500 francs left, as well as a watch worth 1,000 francs, a few diamond studs, and so on. Consequently, I could subsist for quite a length of time without particularly bestirring myself. Purposely I have taken up my abode where I am now partly to pull myself together, and partly to wait for Mr. Astley, who, I have learnt, will soon be here for a day or so on business. Yes, I know that, and then I shall go to Hamburg. But to Roulettenberg I shall not go until next year, for they say it is bad to try one's luck twice in succession at a table. Moreover, Hamburg is where the best play is carried on. End of chapter 16. Recording by Bill Borst. Chapter 17 of The Gambler. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Gambler, by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by C.J. Hogarth. Chapter 17. It is a year and 8 months since I last looked at these notes of mine. I do so now only because, being overwhelmed with depression, I wish to distract my mind by reading them through at random. I left them off at the point where I was just going to Hamburg. My God! With what a light heart, comparatively speaking, did I write the concluding lines! Though it may be not so much with a light heart as with a measure of self-confidence and unquenchable hope. At that time had I any doubts of myself? Yet behold me now. Scarcely a year and a half have passed, yet I am in a worse position than the meanest beggar. But what is a beggar? A fig for beggary! I have ruined myself, that is all. Nor is there anything with which I can compare myself. There is no moral which it would be of any use for you to read to me. At the present moment nothing could well be more incongruous than a moral. O you self-satisfied persons who, in your unctuous pride, are forever ready to mouth your maxims! If only you knew how fully I myself comprehend the sordidness of my present state, you would not trouble to wag your tongues at me. What could you say to me that I do not already know? Well, wherein lies my difficulty? It lies in the fact that by a single turn of a roulette wheel everything for me has become changed. Yet, had things befallen otherwise, these moralists would have been among the first, yes, I feel persuaded of it, to approach me with friendly jests and congratulations. Yes, they would never have turned from me as they are doing now. A fig for all of them! What am I? I am zero, nothing. What shall I be tomorrow? I may be risen from the dead and have begun life anew. For still, I may discover the man in myself, if only my manhood has not become utterly shattered. I went, I say, to Hamburg, but afterwards went also to Roulettenberg, as well as to Spa and Baden, in which latter place for a time I acted as valet to a certain rascal of a privy councillor, by name Heinz, who until lately was also my master here. Yes, for 5 months I lived my life with lacqueys. That was just after I had come out of Roulettenberg prison, where I had lain for a small debt which I owed. Out of that prison I was bailed by whom? By Mr. Astley? By Polina? I do not know. At all events, the debt was paid to the tune of 200 thalers, and I sallied forth a free man. But what was I to do with myself? In my dilemma I had recourse to this Heinz, who was a young scapegrace, and the sort of man who could speak and write 3 languages. At first I acted as his secretary, at a salary of 30 gulden a month, but afterwards I became his lackey, for the reason that he could not afford to keep a secretary, only an unpaid servant. I had nothing else to turn to, so I remained with him, and allowed myself to become his flunkey. But by stinting myself in meat and drink, I saved, during my 5 months of service, some 70 gulden, and one evening, when we were at Baden, I told him that I wished to resign my post, and then hastened to betake myself to roulette. Oh, how my heart beat as I did so! No, it was not the money that I valued. What I wanted was to make all this mob of Heintzes, hotel proprietors, and fine ladies of Baden talk about me, recount my story, wonder at me, extol my doings, and worship my winnings. True, these were childish fancies and aspirations. But who knows but that I might meet Polina, and be able to tell her everything, and see her look of surprise at the fact that I had overcome so many adverse strokes of fortune? No, I had no desire for money for its own sake, for I was perfectly well aware that I should only squander it upon some new Blanche, and spend another 3 weeks in Paris, after buying a pair of horses which had cost 16,000 francs. No, I never believed myself to be a hoarder. In fact, I knew only too well that I was a spendthrift. And already, with a sort of fear, a sort of sinking in my heart, I could hear the cries of the croupiers: "Trente et un, rouge, impair et passe, quart noir, pair et manque." How greedily I gazed upon the gaming table, with its scattered louis d'or, 10 gulden pieces, and thalers, upon the streams of gold as they issued from the croupiers' hands, and piled themselves up into heaps of gold scintillating as fire; upon the L, long rolls of silver lying around the croupier. Even at a distance of 2 rooms I could hear the chink of that money, so much so that I nearly fell into convulsions. Ah, the evening when I took those 70 gulden to the gaming table was a memorable one for me. I began by staking 10 gulden upon pass. For pass I had always had a sort of predilection, yet I lost my stake upon it. This left me with 60 gulden in silver. After a moment's thought I selected 0, beginning by staking 5 gulden at a time. Twice I lost, but the third round suddenly brought up the desired coup. I could almost have died with joy as I received my 175 gulden. Indeed, I have been less pleased when, in former times, I have won 100,000 gulden. Losing no time, I staked another 100 gulden upon the red, and won; 200 upon the red, and won; 400 upon the black, and won; 800 upon manque, and won. Thus, with the addition of the remainder of my original capital, I found myself possessed, within 5 minutes, of 1,700 gulden. Ah! At such moments one forgets both oneself and one's former failures. This I had gained by risking my very life. I had dared so to risk, and behold, again I was a member of mankind. I went and hired a room. I shut myself up in it, and sat counting my money until 3 o'clock in the morning. To think that when I awoke on the morrow, I was no lackey! I decided to leave at once for Hamburg. There I should neither have to serve as a footman, nor to lie in prison. Half an hour before starting, I went and ventured a couple of stakes, no more, with the result that, in all, I lost 1,500 florins. Nevertheless, I proceeded to Hamburg, and have now been there for a month. Of course, I am living in constant trepidation, playing for the smallest of stakes, and always looking out for something, calculating, standing whole days by the gaming tables to watch the play, even seeing that play in my dreams, yet seeming, the while, to be in some way stiffening, to be growing caked, as it were, in mire. But I must conclude my notes, which I finish under the impression of a recent encounter with Mr. Astley. I had not seen him since we parted at Roulettenberg, and now we met quite by accident. At the time I was walking in the public gardens, and meditating upon the fact that not only had I still some 50 gulden in my possession, but also I had fully paid up my hotel bill 3 days ago. Consequently, I was in a position to try my luck again at roulette. And if I won anything, I should be able to continue my play, whereas if I lost what I now possessed, I should once more have to accept a lackey's place, provided that, in the alternative, I failed to discover a Russian family which stood in need of a tutor. Plunged in these reflections, I started on my daily walk through the park and forest towards a neighbouring principality. Sometimes, on such occasions, I spent 4 hours on the way, and would return to Hamburg tired and hungry. But on this particular occasion I had scarcely left the gardens for the park when I caught sight of Astley, seated on a bench. As soon as he perceived me, he called me by name, and I went and sat down beside him. But, on noticing that he seemed a little stiff in his manner, I hastened to moderate the expression of joy which the sight of him had called forth. "You here?" he said. "Well, I had an idea that I should meet you. Do not trouble to tell me anything, for I know all. Yes, all. In fact, your whole life during the past 20 months lies within my knowledge." "How closely you watch the doings of your old friends!" I replied. "That does you infinite credit. But stop a moment. You have reminded me of something. Was it you who bailed me out of Roulettenberg prison when I was lying there for a debt of 200 gulden? Some one did so." "Oh dear, no, though I knew all the time that you were lying there." "Perhaps you could tell me who did bail me out?" "No, I'm afraid I could not." "What a strange thing! For I know no Russians at all here, so it cannot have been a Russian who befriended me. In Russia we Orthodox folk do go bail for one another, but in this case I thought it must have been done by some English stranger who was not conversant with the ways of the country." Mr. Astley seemed to listen to me with a sort of surprise. Evidently he had expected to see me looking more crushed and broken than I was. "Well," he said, not very pleasantly, "I am none the less glad to find that you retain your old independence of spirit, as well as your buoyancy." "Which means that you are vexed at not having found me more abased and humiliated than I am," I retorted with a smile. Astley was not quick to understand this, but presently did so and laughed. "Your remarks please me as they always did," he continued. "In those words I see the clever, triumphant, and, above all things, cynical friend of former days. Only Russians have the faculty of combining within themselves so many opposite qualities. Yes, most men love to see their best friend in abasement, for generally it is on such abasement that friendship is founded. All thinking persons know that ancient truth. Yet on the present occasion, I assure you, I am sincerely glad to see that you are not cast down. Tell me, are you never going to give up gambling?" "Damn the gambling! Yes, I should certainly have given it up were it not that—" "That you are losing?" "I thought so. You need not tell me any more. I know how things stand, for you have said that last in despair, and therefore truthfully. Have you no other employment than gambling?" "No, none whatever." Astley gave me a searching glance. At that time it was ages since I had last looked at a paper or turned the pages of a book. "You are growing blasé," he said. "You have not only renounced life, with its interests and social ties, but the duties of a citizen and a man. You have not only renounced the friends whom I know you to have had, and every aim in life but that of winning money, but you have also renounced your memory. Though I can remember you in the strong, ardent period of your life, I feel persuaded that you have now forgotten every better feeling of that period, that your present dreams and aspirations of subsistence do not rise above pair, impair, rouge, noir, the 12 middle numbers, and so forth." "Enough, Mr. Astley!" I cried with some irritation, almost in anger. "Kindly do not recall to me any more recollections, for I can remember things for myself. Only for a time have I put them out of my head. Only until I shall have rehabilitated myself am I keeping my memory dulled. When that hour shall come, you will see me arise from the dead." "Then you will have to be here another 10 years," he replied. "Should I then be alive, I will remind you, here on this very bench, of what I have just said. In fact, I will bet you a wager that I shall do so." "Say no more," I interrupted impatiently. "And to show you that I have not wholly forgotten the past, may I inquire where Mlle. Polina is? If it was not you who bailed me out of prison, it must have been she. Yet never have I heard a word concerning her." "No, I do not think it was she. At the present moment she is in Switzerland, and you will do me a favour by ceasing to ask me these questions about her." Astley said this with a firm and even an angry air. "Which means that she has dealt you a serious wound?" I burst out with an involuntary sneer. "Mlle. Polina," he continued, "is the best of all possible living beings. But, I repeat, that I shall thank you to cease questioning me about her. You never really knew her, and her name on your lips is an offence to my moral feeling." "Indeed! On what subject, then, have I a better right to speak to you than on this? With it are bound up all your recollections and mine. However, do not be alarmed. I have no wish to probe too far into your private, your secret affairs. My interest in Mlle. Polina does not extend beyond her outward circumstances and surroundings. About them you could tell me in 2 words. Well, on condition that the matter shall end there, I will tell you that for a long time Mlle. Polina was ill, and still is so. My mother and sister entertained her for a while at their home in the north of England, and thereafter Mlle. Polina's grandmother, you remember the mad old woman, died, and left Mlle. Polina a personal legacy of £7,000 sterling. That was about 6 months ago, and now Mademoiselle is travelling with my sister's family, my sister having since married. Mademoiselle's little brother and sister also benefited by the grandmother's will, and are now being educated in London. As for the General, he died in Paris last month, of a stroke. Mlle. Blanche did well by him, for she succeeded in having transferred to herself all that he received from the grandmother. That, I think, concludes all that I have to tell. And De Griers? Is he too travelling in Switzerland? No. Nor do I know where he is. Also, I warn you once more that you had better avoid such hints and ignoble suppositions. Otherwise you will assuredly have to reckon with me. What, in spite of our old friendship? Yes, in spite of our old friendship." "Then I beg your pardon 1,000 times, Mr. Astley. I meant nothing offensive to Mlle. Polina, for I have nothing of which to accuse her. Moreover, the question of there being anything between this Frenchman and this Russian lady is not one which you and I need discuss, nor even attempt to understand." "If," replied Astley, "you do not care to hear their names coupled together, may I ask you what you mean by the expressions 'this Frenchman,' 'this Russian lady,' and 'there being anything between them'? Why do you call them so particularly 'a Frenchman' and 'a Russian lady'?" "Ah, I see you are interested, Mr. Astley, but it is a long, long story, and calls for a lengthy preface. At the same time, the question is an important one, however ridiculous it may seem at the first glance. A Frenchman, Mr. Astley, is merely a fine figure of a man. With this you, as a Britisher, may not agree. With it I also, as a Russian, may not agree, out of envy. Yet possibly our good ladies are of another opinion. For instance, one may look upon Racine as a broken-down hobbledehoy, perfumed individual. One may even be unable to read him, and I too may think him the same, as well as, in some respects, a subject for ridicule. Yet about him, Mr. Astley, there is a certain charm, and above all things he is a great poet, though one might like to deny it. Yes, the Frenchman, the Parisian, as a national figure, was in process of developing into a figure of elegance before we Russians had even ceased to be bears. The Revolution bequeathed to the French nobility its heritage, and now every whipper-snapper of a Parisian may possess manners, methods of expression, and even thoughts that are above reproach in form, while all the time he himself may share in that form neither in initiative, nor in intellect, nor in soul, his manners and the rest having come to him through inheritance. Yes, taken by himself, the Frenchman is frequently a fool of fools, and a villain of villains. Per contra, there is no one in the world more worthy of confidence and respect than this young Russian lady. De Griers might so mask his face and play a part as easily to overcome her heart, for he has an imposing figure, Mr. Astley, and this young lady might easily take that figure for his real self, for the natural form of his heart and soul, instead of the mere cloak with which heredity has dowered him. And even though it may offend you, I feel bound to say that the majority also of English people are uncouth and unrefined, whereas we Russian folk can recognize beauty wherever we see it, and are always eager to cultivate the same. But to distinguish beauty of soul and personal originality, there is needed far more independence and freedom than is possessed by our women, especially by our younger ladies. At all events, they need more experience. For instance, this Mlle. Polina, pardon me, but the name has passed my lips, and I cannot well recall it, is taking a very long time to make up her mind to prefer you to Monsieur de Griers. She may respect you, she may become your friend, she may open out her heart to you, yet over that heart there will be reigning that loathsome villain, that mean and petty usurer, de Griers. This will be due to obstinacy and self-love, to the fact that de Griers once appeared to her in the transfigured guise of a marquis, of a disenchanted and ruined Liberal, who was doing his best to help her family and the frivolous old General. And although these transactions of his have since been exposed, you will find that the exposure has made no impression upon her mind. Only give her the de Griers of former days, and she will ask of you no more. The more she may detest the present de Griers, the more she will lament the de Griers of the past, even though the latter never existed but in her own imagination. You are a sugar refiner, Mr. Astley, are you not? Yes, I belong to the well-known firm of Lovell and Company. Then see here. On the one hand you are a sugar refiner, while on the other hand you are an Apollo Belvedere. But the two characters do not mix with one another. I, again, am not even a sugar refiner. I am a mere roulette gambler who has also served as a lackey. Of this fact Mlle. Polina is probably well aware, since she appears to have an excellent force of police at her disposal. "You are saying this because you are feeling bitter," said Astley with cold indifference. "Yet there is not the least originality in your words." "I agree. But therein lies the horror of it all. that how trepidation, playing ever mean and farcical, my accusations may be, they are none the less true. But I am only wasting words." "Yes, you are, for you are only talking nonsense," exclaimed my companion, his voice now trembling, and his eyes flashing fire. "Are you aware," he continued, "that wretched, ignoble, petty, unfortunate man though you are, it was at her request that I came to Hamburg, in order to see you, and to have a long, serious talk with you, and to report to her your feelings and thoughts and hopes? Yes, and your recollections of her, too?" "Indeed? Is that really so?" I cried, the tears beginning to well from my eyes. Never before had this happened. "Yes, poor unfortunate," continued Astley, "she did love you. And I may tell you this now for the reason that now you are utterly lost. Even if I were also to tell you that she still loves you, you would none the less have to remain where you are. Yes, you have ruined yourself beyond redemption. Once upon a time you had a certain amount of talent, and you were of a lively disposition, and your good looks were not to be despised. You might even have been useful to your country, which needs men like you. Yet you remained here, and your life is now over. I am not blaming you for this. In my view all Russians resemble you, or are inclined to do so. If it is not roulette, then it is something else. The exceptions are very rare. Nor are you the first to learn what a taskmaster is yours. For roulette is not exclusively a Russian game. Hitherto you have honourably preferred to serve as a lackey rather than to act as a thief, but what the future may have in store for you I tremble to think. Now good-bye. You are in want of money, I suppose? Then take these 10 louis d'or. More I shall not give you, for you would only gamble it away. Take care of these coins, and farewell. Once more, take care of them." "No, Mr. Astley, after all that has been said, I—" "Take care of them," repeated my friend. "I am certain you are still a gentleman, and therefore I give you the money as one gentleman may give money to another. Also, if I could be certain that you would leave both Hamburg and the gaming tables and return to your own country, I would give you £1,000 down to start life afresh. But I give you 10 louis d'or instead of £1,000, for the reason that at the present time £1,000 and 10 louis d'or will be all the same to you. You will lose the one as readily as you will the other. Take the money, therefore, and good-bye." "Yes, I will take it, if at the same time you will embrace me." "With pleasure." So we parted, on terms of sincere affection. But he was wrong. If I was hard and undiscerning as regards Polina and De Griers, he was hard and undiscerning as regards Russian people generally. Of myself I say nothing. Yet words are only words. I need to act. Above all things I need to think of Switzerland. Tomorrow, tomorrow. Ah, but if only I could set things right tomorrow, and be born again, and rise again from the dead. But no, I cannot. Yet I must show her what I can do. Even if she should do no more than learn that I can still play the man, it would be worth it. Today it is too late, but tomorrow. Yet I have a presentiment that things can never be otherwise. I have got 15 louis d'or in my possession, although I began with 15 gulden. If I were to play carefully at the start— But no, no, surely I am not such a fool as that. Yet why should I not rise from the dead? I should require at first but to go cautiously and patiently, and the rest would follow. I should require but to put a check upon my nature for 1 hour, and my fortunes would be changed entirely. Yes, my nature is my weak point. I have only to remember what happened to me some months ago at Roulettenberg, before my final ruin. What a notable instance that was of my capacity for resolution! On the occasion in question I had lost everything. Everything. Yet just as I was leaving the casino I heard another gulden give a rattle in my pocket. Perhaps I shall need it for a meal, I thought to myself. But 100 paces further on, I changed my mind, and returned. That gulden I staked upon Manque, and there is something in the feeling that though one is alone, and in a foreign land, and far from one's own home and friends, and ignorant of whence one's next meal is to come, one is nevertheless staking one's very last coin. Well, I won the stake, and in 20 minutes had left the casino with 170 gülden in my pocket. That is a fact, and it shows what a last remaining gülden can do. But what if my heart had failed me, or I had shrunk from making up my mind? No. Tomorrow all shall be ended. End of Chapter 17 and End of The Gambler by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Recording by Bill Borst.